Chapter 1579. The third layer of the tree of Tao verification was also the final barrier in the tunnel between ancient Zong and the legendary expanse cosmos. At the instant Su Ming stepped into the place, he saw wreckage. It looked as if someone had used a great divine ability to destroy it, and a thick aura of death filled the wreckage. The land was not vast, and Su Ming could sense where the edges of the land were. When he cast his gaze over the area, he saw the ancient tree of Tao verification standing tall at the center of the land. There were not many leaves on the tree crown, but its complicated branches seemed to cover the sky, causing all those who lifted their heads to not see the sky, but endless branches. An ancient presence spread out from the tree, causing Su Ming's heart to tremble violently at the instant he saw it. This tremor came very suddenly, as if it had always existed in Su Ming's soul, and had just woken up at that moment, because he sensed a hint of Ikang's presence from the tree. Or rather, the former Ikang possessed a hint of the tree's presence. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. A thought rose in his head. When Emperor of Ancient Zong brought the tree back from the other expanse cosmos, quite a lot of the tree had crumbled. Some of its trunks turned into sacred wood, and some of its branches had given birth to life for some unknown reason. As he stared at the tree and sensed its ancient presence, Su Ming also sensed the tree of Tao verification sorrow. Perhaps it would be difficult for others to understand it, but only Su Ming could sense it very clearly, perhaps because he was a king. In silence, the feng shui compass appeared under Su Ming's feet, and he turned into a long arc that charged towards a tree. When he sensed the tree's desolate presence, he also saw two fruits, one big and one small, at the top of the tree crown that replaced the sky. The big fruit shone with a dark light, and it was about the size of a baby's head. The small fruit was about half the size of a fist. At that moment, it was shining with a gentle orange-yellow light. A thick, sweet scent spread out and filled the world. Su Ming was the first cultivator to step into the third layer in the battle of Tao verification. He might only have an advantage of dozens of breaths, but if there were no external forces interfering with his progress, he would have already won most of the battle. At that moment, he was so fast that in the span of a few breaths, he closed in on the tree of Tao verification. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He immediately noticed that there was a powerful, mighty pressure in the third layer. That pressure would only decrease slightly when he came into contact with the ancient tree. It meant that he could not fly to the Phala. It was as if it was a form of blasphemy and was not permitted by the tree of Tao verification. If he wanted to obtain the Phala, there was only one way, and it was to climb the tree. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. He shot up from the ground and stepped on the tree of Tao verification. Without any hesitation, he rushed up. The closer he got to the tree crown, the stronger the sweet scent became. As Su Ming breathed in, he could sense that his cultivation base was so vast that it felt as if it was boiling. The feeling of his cultivation base boiling caused Su Ming to immediately notice that even his Tao spirit was being nourished. The scent was the exact same as what he had absorbed in the first and second layers, but it was even thicker. But the higher he went, the stronger the mighty pressure became. If it was not because of the nourishment from the sweet scent, Su Ming would have definitely been 40 to 50% slower. Almost at the same time, Su Ming charged up the tree. Several figures appeared on the ground. They were all disciples of Seven Moons sect. Once they appeared, they lifted their heads and looked at Su Ming, who was climbing the tree. Determination immediately appeared on their faces, and they charged towards the tree. Once they sat down to meditate under the tree, determination appeared in their eyes. Their goal in coming to this place was to help Su Ming obtain a greater advantage. This was the mission given to them by the sect, and it was something they had to complete. Even if they had to sacrifice themselves, they had to ensure that they completed their mission. For this, the sect had already given them a sufficient price. It might be difficult for them to obtain it, but their descendants and their families would receive better treatment because of it. The people gritted their teeth and closed their eyes at the same time. Immediately, their bodies turned purplish red. Time passed. The advantage of dozens of breaths was gone in the blink of an eye, and Su Ming was already 40,000-something feet above the tree of Tao verification. He might still be very far away from the tree crown, but the fact that he could appear there meant that he had an incredibly great advantage. At that moment, several long arcs charged up from the third layer. The two people in the lead were the first and second princes. Once they appeared in the third layer, they saw Su Ming at first glance. Killing intent appeared in their eyes, and they turned into long arcs that charged towards the tree of Tao verification. But at the instant they closed in, the 6 Seven Moons sect disciples sitting under the tree opened their eyes, and their bodies exploded with a bang. Their levels of cultivation were not high, but they had prepared for this for a long time, which was why when they self-destructed, an astonishing presence erupted from their bodies. That presence spread out with a bang and turned into a pillar of light that surrounded the tree of Tao verification before rushing into the sky. In fact, it went past Su Ming's spot and instantly covered a height of nearly 100,000 feet. The tree of Tao verification's trunk was surrounded by the pillar of light, causing no one to be able to touch it. If anyone wanted to obtain the Phala, they could only fly up and withstand the powerful, mighty pressure from the tree. Only when they were 100,000 feet above the tree could they touch the trunk and reduce the pressure. The 6 cultivators from Seven Moons sect should not have been able to do this. In truth, the 10 Tao paragons among the great sect elders of Seven Moons sect had to pay the price to cover that distance of 100,000 feet. Without affecting their cultivation bases, they had prepared for an instant to release and erupt with power. This could not last for long. It could only last for about 30 breaths, but during those 30 breaths, Su Ming gained an incredibly great advantage. The moment the pillar of light appeared, the first and second princes closed in. Once they touched it, booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the two of them were forced back by the rebound. Damn you, Seven Moons sect! Powerful killing intent appeared in the second prince's eyes. With one move, he turned into a long arc that charged into the sky. Clearly, he wanted to withstand the mighty pressure and fly up 100,000 feet. But when he flew only 20,000 feet, his expression changed drastically. The mighty pressure from the sky instantly made him feel as if he was about to lose most of his cultivation base. He lifted his head swiftly and cast a glance at the 100,000 feet pillar of light. Based on his calculations, he could only fly up to 30,000 feet. The distance of 100,000 feet was like a ravine that was difficult for anyone to cross. It was as if they could only wait for the pillar of light to disappear on its own. Both the first and second princes knew that it was impossible for the pillar of light to last for long. At most, it would last for dozens of breaths. But they had already lost dozens of breaths. If they lost dozens of breaths again, then the possibility of them obtaining the Phala in the third layer would be next to none. Su Ming had already reached a height of nearly 50,000 feet. And he was still going up. This scene immediately caused resolve to appear in the first prince's eyes. He originally did not want to use his other methods so soon. After all, even great Tao paragons could not stay in the third layer for long. This was a method he had prepared to use at the most critical moment. But right then, the development of the situation forced him to use it. The first prince lifted his right hand. As his eyes sparkled, he struck the center of his brows. He instantly sat down cross-legged, formed a seal with his left hand, and pointed at his dantian region. Violent booms immediately came from his body. As they echoed in the air, his expression contorted, as if he was enduring great pain. At the same time, his cultivation base erupted with a bang, and it surpassed that of a Tao paragon. In fact, it was even stronger than before. It stirred up the power of the world around him, and the weather seemed to change at that instant. With a bang, the first prince immediately closed his eyes. At that moment, his cultivation base erupted again, and he reached a breakthrough from a Tao paragon to a great Tao paragon. At the instant he became a great Tao paragon, the first prince slowly opened his eyes. There was an ancient air to the light in them, as if he was no longer the first prince, but someone else. There was a chill in that ancient air. He was indeed no longer the first prince, but one Dao sect's great Dao paragon, Lin Dong Dong. With his will descending in the first prince's body, guided by his blood, one Dao sect's art of Kismet, and the changes in the laws in ancient Zong, which were practically of the same origin as one Dao sect in the third layer. Lin Dong Dong temporarily occupied the first prince's body as if he had possessed it. When he got up, a cold sneer appeared at the corners of Lin Dong Dong's lips. He moved, but he did not break the pillar of light. Instead, he rose into the air and left. He would naturally not do something that would benefit others by destroying the pillar of light. At that moment, as he charged forward, he withstood the mighty pressure from the sky and instantly reached 50,000 feet. As he continued charging forward, Su Ming cast a glance at the pillar of light, then charged forward as well. The two of them were separated by the pillar of light. One of them was inside, and the other was outside, so their speed reached a certain balance. After all, Lin Dong Dong was weakened by the mighty pressure outside, while Su Ming had a fragrant scent to nourish him. The mighty pressure was also much weaker, which was why the balance was never broken even as the two of them continued ascending. A brilliant light shone in the second prince's eyes as he stood on the ground below. When he lifted his right hand, 9 jade slips immediately appeared on his palm, and he pushed them on the ground. The 9 jade slips spread out and formed a formation about 3 feet in size. As the light from the jade slips shone rapidly, the piercing light enveloped the entire formation, and the second prince's anxious voice reverberated in the air. "Master, please help me." Chapter 1580. Almost at the instant the second prince spoke, the 9 jade slips shattered into pieces at the same time. At the instant they turned into jade powder and spread out. An ancient presence spread out from the rune. As the aura appeared, a headless figure directly condensed from the jade powder and appeared in the third layer. "Break the pillar of light," the second prince said without any hesitation. He was already far behind. If he still did not break the pillar of light, then even if he flew into the air, he would not be able to catch up to Su Ming and the first prince. The only way was to destroy the pillar of light. Although that would benefit the first prince, the second prince knew that it was the only way. Furthermore, the pillar of light would definitely be destroyed from the bottom up. In that case, he would be able to buy himself some time from a disadvantageous position. At the instant he said those words, the headless figure dressed in black robes moved swiftly and appeared beyond the pillar of light. When he lifted his right hand, the shadow of a huge battle axe appeared in his hand, and he swung it down at the pillar of light. With it, the world roared. The pillar of light shuddered, and it shattered, unable to withstand the attack. As it shattered, the 10 great sect elders of 7 Moons sect who were meditating in the second layer coughed up blood at the corners of their mouths, and their eyes flew open. At the same time, in the third layer, as the pillar of light began to shatter from the bottom and spread rapidly upwards, the second prince took a step forward and let out a piercing cry. "Bring me up." When he said those words and approached the ancient tree, the headless figure closed in on him. He grabbed the second prince's body and took a step forward to step on the tree of Dao verification. As the pillar of light outside shattered, he charged up with the second prince. In an instant, they traveled 10,000 feet. At that moment, Su Ming was already 90,000 feet above the ancient tree. When he lowered his head and saw the headless figure, his heart trembled. At the first glance, the figure of his eldest senior brother immediately appeared in his mind. However, he did not have much time to think at that moment. The pillar of light had collapsed. The eldest prince, who seemed to have changed into a different person, and the headless figure, who had unleashed a cultivation base comparable to a great Dao venerable, were rapidly reducing his advantage. In an instant, when the pillar of light shattered and was about to be broken, the first prince charged towards the trunk of the ancient tree. Judging by his movements, it was clear that he wanted to attack Su Ming the moment he got close to the ancient tree. The headless figure beneath had caught up to him by then, and he was less than 20,000 feet away from Su Ming. After all, The two of them had great Tao paragons helping them, and Su Ming could not do so. If it were anyone else, they would only have two choices at that moment. One of them would be to reduce their speed and give up their advantage. By doing so, they would be able to avoid being killed. After all, both the first and second princes had come for the Phala. The other choice was to continue moving forward regardless of the cost, and fight to maintain the advantage that was perhaps already negligible. But Su Ming did not choose either of those two choices. Instead, he turned his head around swiftly and looked at the first prince, who stood beyond the pillar of light that was about to shatter. There was a hint of derision in his cold, arrogant expression. A myriad of thoughts raced in Su Ming's head. During that instant, he did something the second prince did not expect, and neither did Lin Dongdong. When Su Ming lifted his right hand, the space whip appeared. At the instant the pillar of light shattered, the whip's shadow charged towards the first prince. He had taken the initiative to attack. When the whip's shadow appeared, Su Ming lifted his left hand. The axe appeared in his hand, and he swiftly swung it at the first prince. The world roared. A derisive smile appeared at the corners of the first prince's lips. He might be withstanding an incredibly mighty pressure at that moment, but he was confident that Su Ming would not be able to shake him. When the whip shadow closed in, the first prince lifted his right hand and pointed at it. Immediately, a lotus appeared on his finger. It instantly shattered and turned into a lotus windstorm that went up against the space whip. At the same time, in the face of Su Ming's axe slashing down, the first prince lifted his left hand and pushed downwards. Immediately, the region looked as if it had been sealed. It instantly froze up, causing Su Ming's axe to look as if it had cut into water. It stirred up ripples, but it could not shake the frozen world. You overestimate yourself. The first prince's derisive tone turned into a voice. At the instant he spoke, he charged towards Su Ming, but the instant he closed in, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Once he let go of the space whip in his right hand, he pushed the brand on his palm towards the incoming first prince. Since it was destined that the first prince would attack once the pillar of light shattered, Su Ming would rather the attack be under his control. That was why he had taken the initiative to attack, all for the sake of making the first prince close in on him. When Su Ming's right hand fell and the first prince closed in on him, the first prince's expression suddenly changed. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth. The brand on Su Ming's right hand sucked in a breath, and all the power he had accumulated along the way erupted from it. At that moment, even though it could not compare to a great Tao Paragon's, it had long since surpassed a full-powered strike from a Tao Paragon. If it had been any other time, this sort of strike would have been slightly shocking to a great Tao Paragon, but they would have been able to face it calmly, but they were in the third layer. Lin Dongdong had flown up 100,000 feet, and he had already withstood too much of the mighty pressure. Because of that, the strike, and the fact that he had absorbed his own power just then instantly became the key. Booming sounds echoed in the air. When Lin Dongdong's expression changed, his body froze. At the same time, Su Ming coughed up a mouthful of blood and fell back, leaving the tree of Tao verification. Yet the instant he flew out and the mighty pressure from the sky descended on him, the space whip that Su Ming had thrown out previously came swiftly and wrapped itself around Su Ming's body. Then, as if there was someone yanking on it, Su Ming's body was dragged into the air in an instant. The space whip Su Ming had brought out was not meant to strike the first prince. It was just a decoy. The true purpose of the whip was because Su Ming had used its strength to wrap it around the tree trunk above him. Then, with his will, he controlled it so that when he was forced back, the whip would wrap itself around him and pull him up. If that was the case, the first prince would have lost the initiative. Even if he tried to stop Su Ming, the absorption and bombardment from Su Ming's brand on his right hand was definitely not something to be trifled with. It was enough to make the first prince's heart tremble. Besides, Su Ming had clearly predicted that the first prince would not be able to continue trying to stop Su Ming, and the second prince was still 10,000-something feet away from him. Su Ming's timing was incredibly precise. If he had been slightly slower and the second prince had gotten closer, then even if he had done the same thing, He would have been able to stop the first prince, but he would not have been able to stop the second prince from attacking. Yet at that moment, it did not matter whether it was the first prince or the second prince. They could only watch helplessly as Su Ming was dragged into the air by the space whip. But Su Ming also paid a price. It did not matter whether it was the blood he coughed up or the mighty pressure from the sky when he was forcefully dragged up without touching the tree trunk. The mighty pressure from the sky instantly made Su Ming feel as if his body was about to crumble. Fortunately, the closer he got to the top, even if he did not touch the tree trunk, Su Ming could still sense the thick, fragrant scent. He absorbed it swiftly, and his body, which was on the verge of breaking down, was rapidly recovering. This might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, in the blink of an eye, Su Ming's body was dragged by the space whip. He rose 50,000-something feet into the air. Blood flowed out of his eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and mouth. When his body looked as if it was about to crumble, he returned to the tree of Tao verification. Once he seized the branch, he charged up without any hesitation. Killing intent appeared in the eyes of the first prince below him, and he charged forward as well. A strange light shone in the second prince's eyes. Su Ming's actions just then might have seemed dangerous, but in truth, he had made precise calculations. This caused the second prince's heart to tremble. He suddenly realized that he should get to know his third brother once more. He actually managed to maintain his advantage even in this situation. A solemn look appeared in the second prince's eyes. The words in his heart rang out in Azura clan at that moment. In Azura clan, the mud at the center of the 9 statues had been flattened and turned into an ancient mirror. On it appeared everything the second prince had seen in the third layer. The 9 people in the area had also seen Su Ming's astonishing act. It did not show his level of cultivation, but his calculations and decisiveness. This was the reason behind the grave expressions on the 9 people's faces. We underestimated the third prince. That's right, in such a disadvantageous situation. Even if we were in his place, we wouldn't have been able to come up with such a method in such a short amount of time and even manage to predict the second prince and Lin Dongdong's reactions. One Dao sect actually used such a method? Only they can do it. Even we can only use the laws to send great Dao paragons to one Dao sect, unlike them, who could be considered to have changed some of the laws. But right now, one Dao sect must be the same as us. They will have to reevaluate the third prince. He's bound to become a great Dao paragon, and he's a cultivator with such schemes. He's so terrifying that he surpasses most great Dao paragons. There's no rule that states that deaths are not allowed in the 6,000-year struggle for the throne between the princes. One Dao sect has the art of kismet, and they're the most willing to do this sort of thing. Once the third prince dies, it will be the same as one Dao sect snatching away his kismet. The 9 people suddenly stopped talking. Instead, they cast each other a glance, and smiles appeared on their lips. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Chapter 1581. Within one Dao sect was the world with the 3 ancient statues. At that moment, the sky looked like water. As it sparkled, it reflected the scenes from the tree of Dao verification in the third layer. The scene of Su Ming taking the lead of 50,000 feet due to his ingenious calculations was completely revealed. That child should not leave that place alive. Fellow Taoist Lin, once you obtain the Phala, kill this person. By doing so, not only will you be able to gather your kismet on the first prince, you will also be able to gather it on one Dao sect. You will then be able to continue the glory of one Dao sect. As the dark voice echoed in the air, it seemed to be able to travel through the ripples on the water and the sky and into Lin Dongdong's ears, who was on the tree of Dao verification in the third layer. At the instant Su Ming touched the tree of Dao verification in the third layer, a sense of life-threatening danger rose in his heart. When he lowered his head, he saw the killing intent that shone briefly in the eyes of the first prince, who was 50,000 feet below him. The killing intent was so strong that Su Ming's pupils shrank when he saw it. He also looked towards the second prince, who was 10,000 feet below the first prince. He saw the same killing intent in the second prince's eyes. "You want to kill me here?" A cold sneer appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. There was also a bloodthirsty air in it. When he turned around, he was just about to climb up when he suddenly heard a faint chuckle that sounded like that of a boy's. That chuckle belonged to a boy. It echoed in Su Ming's ears, but when he swept his gaze around him, he found nothing. "I'm here." This time, the voice was no longer chuckling. Instead, it was speaking, and it sounded as if it was drifting past Su Ming's ears. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. He did not pay too much attention to it. He might not have seen too many strange things on his way here, but with Su Ming's experience in life, he would naturally not be surprised. Instead, he continued charging upwards without any hesitation. As he charged forward, the sweet scent continuously grew stronger and surged into Su Ming's pores, causing the mighty pressure in the place to become stronger, but its effect on Su Ming was not great. It was as if the tree had been prepared for him. "Your presence reminds me of my family." The voice spoke again. This time it still sounded like a child's, but there was a hint of melancholy in it. "They left. I don't know where they went. I'm the only one left." When the voice echoed in the air, Su Ming had already rushed to the middle of the tree of Dao verification. He was still hundreds of thousands of feet away from the tree crown that replaced the sky. Behind him, the first prince chased after him with the power of a great Dao paragon. His speed surpassed Su Ming's, and he was already 30,000 feet away from him. The second prince maintained a distance of thousands of feet between him and the first prince. "Of the 4 people behind you, except for 3 of them, I don't like the rest." It's not really 2, it's hard to explain. One of them has 3 souls in his body, and one of them feels close to me, just like you. There's another one, the one without a head. He doesn't have a soul, but his body has an aura that I'm familiar with. The last one, I like his right eye, but they're all very strange. Only your aura is very pure. Are you my family?" When the voice echoed in the air, Su Ming came to an abrupt halt. His pupils shrank, and he charged forward again. However, he spoke in his heart. "Who are you?" "Me? I don't know who I am either. I only remember that I used to play with the 9 butterflies. I had a lot of family members by my side, and they liked me a lot. But one day, a bad person came." The childlike voice seemed to have become sad as it spoke. When Su Ming heard that, his heart trembled, but he was not certain of the answer that had appeared in his mind at that moment. As he charged forward, he asked again, What's your name?" How. "My name is How. I was brought here by that bad person, but I missed home. That bad person bound my body and forced me to stay here. You make me feel very close to you. Are you my family?" The childlike voice hesitated for a moment, then asked again, as if it was slightly afraid. Su Ming was about to speak when a brilliant light shone in the eyes of the first prince beneath him. He lifted his right hand and struck the ancient tree of Dao verification. At the same time, his voice echoed in all directions. "Ancient Zong Dao, one Dao sect, gather your kismet and change the laws." As his words spread out, endless ripples appeared in the 3rd layer. As they spread out, the first prince's body became indistinct and disappeared. When he reappeared the next breath, he was only 5,000 feet behind Su Ming. His body became clear, and he rushed towards Su Ming. "With your level of cultivation in Dao spirit realm, it's impossible for you to step onto the tree crown. You are bound to fail in this fight. You're also bound to die here. This is a fate you cannot change." When the first prince's voice echoed in the air, it reached Su Ming's ears. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The 4 great wills instantly filled his body. The feng shui compass under his feet shone with a light that reached 100,000 feet. As Su Ming's cultivation base erupted from his body again, he charged upwards while maintaining his charging speed. He was getting closer to the tree crown that replaced the sky. There were only 200,000 feet between him and the tree crown. It was also at that moment that the headless figure beneath the second prince moved. An astonishing power erupted from him, and his speed instantly increased by a large margin. He continued, closing the distance between him and the second prince. However, the difference between Su Ming's level of cultivation and that of a great Dao paragon was too great. Even though the mighty pressure in the place was incredibly strong and Su Ming was continuously recovering with a fragrant scent, the distance of 5,000 feet behind him was still slowly being closed. When he was 100,000 feet away from the tree crown, the first prince was already less than 2,000 feet behind Su Ming. You want to go to the tree crown? You want to go to my homeland, don't you? If you go to my homeland, can you bring me with you? I want to go home. When the child's voice appeared, a thought appeared in Su Ming's heart. Can you help me get to the tree crown? Sure. Once the child's voice said those words, the tree of Dao verification, which Su Ming was in contact with, became limp. It instantly turned into a vortex that sucked Su Ming in. All of this happened too quickly, so much so that the first prince was momentarily stunned. The second prince's pupils also shrank. At that moment, Su Ming's body appeared at a spot nearly 30,000 feet away from the tree crown, as if he had walked out of the ancient tree. Once he appeared, Su Ming's expression lit up. This is all I can do. Hurry up and come up. I'll wait for you up there. We'll go home together. Do you want these 2 fruits as well? All right, I can give them to you. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. The fragrant scent was so thick that the 5th overlapping Dao spirit in his third eye seemed to have swelled up and instantly gained much more corporeal form. When he lifted his head, he stared at the tree crown 30,000 feet away from him. From that spot, he could already see what seemed to be 2 fruits on the tree crown. With a single move, Su Ming charged towards the tree crown while maintaining his speed of charging forward. Tens of thousands of feet below him was Lin Dong Dong, who had temporarily possessed the first prince. Monstrous killing intent shone in his eyes. He had not expected that Su Ming would have such a method to instantly widen the distance between them. This caused him to growl, and loud banging sounds instantly came from his body. When he lifted his right hand, he pointed at the air. My fellow Taoists from one Tao sect, when will the law change? As he spoke, the cultivators in charge of the world where the 3 statues were located in one Tao sect's world were shocked by the sight of Su Ming moving through the ancient tree. When Lin Dong Dong's voice came from the water in the sky, the 6 eyes of the 3 ancient statues instantly opened, and dark light shone from them. At the same time, the 6 rays of dark light charged towards the water in the sky like 6 long arcs. When they sank into it, Lin Dong Dong, who had temporarily possessed the first prince, lifted his right hand, and a large amount of ripples appeared on it. When they spread out, the world in the area instantly turned dark, as if the law had been changed. At the same time, the mighty pressure from the tree of Dao verification instantly lessened. Lin Dong Dong let out a low growl, and his speed instantly increased by several-fold as he charged towards Su Ming. He was so fast that he continuously closed the distance between him and Su Ming. The world around him let out a shocking roar, and countless illusory nets could be vaguely seen appearing in the world. At that moment, they were filled with dark light. If anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see that the nets seemed to be weakening. In fact, some parts of them had even started shattering. The second prince's headless figure shuddered at that moment, as if there was some sort of power burning in his headless body. As it burned, his speed increased exponentially, and he charged towards the tree crown above him. This was the final charge. Regardless of whether it was Su Ming or the other 2, all of them erupted with all their speed and turned into 3 long arcs that charged towards the tree crown. The distance of 30,000 feet was not far for Su Ming, but the 2 people behind him were clearly charging forward with all their might. And because of that, Su Ming's advantage was swiftly being pulled closer. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. When the first and second princes caught up to him, he rose into the air like a shooting star, and almost at the same time as the first prince, he stepped on the tree crown of the tree of Dao verification. At the instant he stepped on it, Su Ming charged towards the slightly smaller phala. As for the first prince, his target was the larger phala. The 2 of them had different goals, but their direction was the same. You're just asking for death. Killing intent shone in the first prince's eyes. He lifted his right hand and flung it forward. Immediately, a vast power that belonged to a great Tao paragon charged towards Su Ming. "I'll help you." At that instant, the childlike voice appeared again. Suddenly, the tree of Tao verification, which had stood tall and still for countless years, started swaying. Chapter 1582. As the tree of Tao verification swayed, the world rumbled. The countless illusory webs in the area began to sway as well. If anyone looked down from high vantage point, they would be able to see that the illusory webs in the world had completely enveloped the tree of Tao verification. The webs of laws were clearly the seals that bound the tree. However, the parts of the nets that had been weakened previously were swiftly shattering, and the areas that had been destroyed previously started cracking. Booming sounds shook the sky at that instant. As the tree of Tao verification swayed, the expression of Lin Dong Dong, who had temporarily possessed the first prince, changed drastically. Even with his level of cultivation, he could still sense an indescribable mighty pressure at that moment. It gathered on his body as the tree crown swayed, causing him to feel as if he had turned into a mortal. He staggered and could not help but take a few steps back. The power of a great Tao paragon charging at Su Ming also dissipated. In fact, even the second prince, who had stepped on the tree crown, moved back with a change of expression. "I want to go home." The child's voice echoed in the air in a shocking manner. Once it appeared, the tree of Tao verification swayed even more violently. The world trembled, and an unprecedented sealing power immediately erupted from the illusory net. The swaying of the tree of Tao verification affected the first and second princes, but its effect on Su Ming was incredibly small. Almost at the instant the tree of Tao verification swayed, Su Ming charged towards the phala. He instantly closed in on it, but just as he was about to take the small phala, the first prince let out a loud roar. "I am Lin Dong Dong, and I have inherited the emperor of ancient Zhang's art of Kismet. I'm a great Tao paragon. Today, with ancient Zhang Dao sect's Kismet and the emperor of ancient Zhang's legacy, I will change the laws again. The laws in this place scatter." Lin Dong Dong, who had temporarily possessed the first prince, had bloodshot eyes at that moment. If the phala was taken away by Su Ming right before his eyes, it would be a humiliation to him. At that moment, even if the tree of Tao verification was swaying violently, Lin Dong Dong still roared. The entire world roared, and the illusory net instantly weakened slightly. The damaged parts turned into cracks, and the shattered parts turned into cracks that connected the net together. At the same time, Lin Dong Dong turned into a long arc. As the laws changed, his power was no longer suppressed. Instead, it erupted forth and charged towards Su Ming. In this long arc, his face changed slightly. He no longer looked like the first prince. Instead, he looked like Lin Dong Dong. He had increased the power of his possession and even did not hesitate to destroy the first prince's foundation. At that moment, when he rushed out, he used a change in the law to chase away the power of the world that erupted when the tree of Tao verification swayed and charged towards Su Ming. But he was still a step too late. Su Ming had already plucked the small phala. In fact, when he swung his right hand, he grabbed the large phala. "Begone!" Lin Dong Dong instantly closed in on Su Ming. With a low roar, he flung his arm, and a vast power that Su Ming could not fight against instantly charged at him. It crashed into his body. This was a furious strike from a great Tao paragon. Su Ming shuddered, and when he was instantly sent tumbling backwards, he coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. His body also looked as if it was about to crumble at that moment. A life and death feeling that his body and soul would be destroyed engulfed Su Ming like a tidal wave. Blood trickled down the corners of Su Ming's mouth. When his body was sent tumbling backwards, Lin Dong Dong grabbed the large phala. The second prince's pupils shrank, and a headless figure beside him charged towards Su Ming. At that instant, Su Ming lifted his right hand and placed the phala by his mouth. With one suck, the phala instantly shriveled and disappeared. A murderous aura appeared in the second prince's eyes, but he was not angry. Instead, his expression turned even darker. When he closed in on Su Ming, his voice echoed in the air. If you didn't swallow the Phala, I wouldn't have killed you on account of our bloodline, but you swallowed it. Perhaps I will have to refine your entire body to obtain the Phala's power. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes, and he immediately called out, How? At that moment, the tree of Tao verification swayed, and booming sounds immediately rang out again. A shocking sound reverberated in all directions. The tree of Tao verification was not the only one that swayed. Its trunk also trembled violently. Huge cracks appeared on the ground, and even the second layer's tremors became stronger. It was especially so for the first layer. As the tree of Tao verification swayed, the 100,000 trees on the 100,000 altars swayed at the same time. As they swayed, a destructive power appeared, as if they were about to collapse and self-destruct. However, it was at that moment that boundless illusory nets appeared in the second and third layers of the sky. The nets enveloped the land, instantly suppressing the aura of self-destruction. However, this scene shocked the cultivators in the first and second layers. Quite a number of them immediately chose to relocate and leave the place. At that moment, quite a number of cultivators charged out of the black hole in the vortex in the sky above ancient Zon. The entire sky roared, and the vortex looked as if it was about to collapse, but it was instantly enveloped by the illusory net. In the royal capital under the vortex was a middle-aged man in an emperor's robe. At that moment, he stood on the altar in the square of the palace. There was a cauldron on the altar, and beneath it was a black and indigo dragon whose body surrounded the entire altar. The dragon opened its eyes and let out a shrill roar. Someone changed the laws, causing the Kismet to change. A disaster has descended. Could it be that the words spoken in the emperor's chamber have come true? The middle-aged man in the emperor's robe mumbled under his breath as he stared at the roaring dragon. At the same time, long arcs charged out from the world with the three ancient statues in one Tao sect. The three statues trembled non-stop, and an endless amount of dust fell from them, making the world look as if it was in chaos. You can't change the laws. Reshape the laws. Lin Dong Dong, you can't continue changing the laws. Anxious voices instantly echoed in the air. Even Azura clan was shocked at that moment. The old men on the 9 statues stared at everything in the ancient mirror with dumbfounded expressions. This is the tree of Tao verification trying to break the laws the emperor set in the past. Damn you, one Tao sect. They shouldn't have changed the laws like this. At that moment, the tree of Tao verification swayed violently again in the third layer. This time, it tore apart the illusory net, causing everything in the place to look as if the world had been turned upside down. Booming sounds rose into the air. Even the second layer trembled at that instant. The 10,000 altars there roared, and the illusory net could no longer continue enveloping them. So it crumbled. As it crumbled, the trunk of the tree of Tao verification stood tall in the ruins of the world. A powerful, mighty pressure appeared, and in an instant, all the cultivators who had not left the second layer crumbled under that mighty pressure. Their blood charged toward the trunk and was swiftly absorbed. At the same time, the second layer shattered to pieces and completely collapsed. The connection with the third layer was cut off, and the first layer also underwent a drastic change. It was the roars from the 100,000 altars. Countless figures flew out of the vortex with panic in their eyes. Among them were Gu Tai and the others. They had already rushed back from the second layer, and the shock of a life and death crisis caused them to be unable to care too much about anything else. At that moment, they flew out of the vortex and appeared in the sky above ancient Zon. An astonishing boom reverberated through all of ancient Zon. It was the vortex in the sky crumbling. As it did, the illusory net enveloping it also shattered. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth, and the vortex was instantly torn to pieces. Even the first layer exploded completely. The dimension formed by the explosion of the 100,000 altars shattered. It was as if all connection between ancient Zong and the dimension where the tree of Tao verification was had been severed. From then on, Phala could no longer appear in ancient Zong. This sort of thing was like a sudden disaster. At that moment, as the vortex in the sky gradually dissipated and the sky returned to normal after a long while, the many people in the royal city stared at the sky in a daze. Their minds were blank. There were quite a number of cultivators who had escaped, but there were also quite a number who did not manage to leave in time, including Su Ming. The first and second princes were all trapped inside. At that moment, as the vortex shattered, they could no longer escape. As the sky returned to normal, the indigo and black dragon's roar in the royal city echoed in the air. The world in one Tao sect trembled. 2 of the 3 statues of the Emperor of Ancient Zong crumbled, and all of one Tao sect descended into chaos. As the world changed, there were 3 people standing on the only statue that did not crumble. One of them was Sun Mu, and the 2 old men beside him were 2 of the 4 great Tao paragons in one Tao sect. They were Qiyong and Bai Lu. It's not that there's no way for us to return, but this is good as well. The person who can walk out will be the future ruler. The 3 of them looked at each other and saw the dark look in each other's eyes. Azura clan might not have descended into chaos, but the things that had happened in the 3rd layer had shocked them. Most of the other sects and clans reacted the same way. They were shocked by the destruction of the dimension where the tree of Tao verification was, and when they remembered that the 3 princes seemed to be trapped inside. When we meet again, we should be outside the city gates. An old man with a bamboo hat in the royal city lifted his head and stared at the sky. After a long while, he sighed softly. At the same time, the sounds of wood being cut came to a halt in the small mountain village in the southwest of ancient Zong. The old man in the courtyard stared at the wood in front of him. In silence, he lifted his head and stared at the sky in the distance. 1,000 years later, I will be in the royal city. The 3 of us will fight. Will you be able to come back in time to watch the ceremony? Oh well, I will wait for you. The old man mumbled softly and lowered his head quietly. I have uploaded a picture of Tao Paragon Blue Dream. I wonder if you still remember him. He's Li Qianmei's father. I also uploaded the revised version of Renegade Celestial. I think that it's much better than the previous version. My fellow Taoists, you could try and take a look. This comic is serialized in King of Comics. If the sales are good, a single beautiful volume of Renegade Celestial will be released. Those who are interested can buy it from all the newspaper stands in the country. Taobao King of Comics. Chapter 1583. I strongly recommend a book. Forging Immortal author. Old Spear. Seeking help from demonic immortal and I Shuang. Alliance Master. I've kept this book a long time ago, but I've never had the time to read it. I heard from Wang Ping that there are close to 3 million words in Forging Immortal. It's already fat and very exciting. Fellow Taoists, if you're interested, you can go and read it. Also, I'm seeking recommendation votes. This week's recommendation list isn't high. I'm seeking support. Chapter 1584. The Emperor of Ancient Zong had once placed an incredibly tight seal on the dimensional barrier connecting Ancient Zong and the once glorious world. With the power of the seal, the tree of Tao verification, which was the most eye-catching and amazing thing in the once glorious world, was tightly bound in that dimension. From then on, the tree became Ancient Zhang's possession, and it also became the enchanted vessel that protected Ancient Zhang's Kismet. The royal family of Ancient Zong practiced the will of Kismet, and the Emperor of Ancient Zong had also used the Tao of Kismet to reach boundless Tao realm. Because of that, the appearance of the tree of Tao verification could be said to have caused the royal family's bloodline to shine with even more brilliance. However, the Emperor of Ancient Zong had not won that battle completely. No one but him knew exactly what had happened, especially when the Emperor of Ancient Zong disappeared many years later and his life plate shattered. All of this showed just how great of a price he had to pay for it. If he had not died and his life plate had not shattered, then no matter what drastic change had occurred in the dimension, it would have been impossible for them to break the Emperor of Ancient Zhang's seal. But no matter what, he had already died. Because of that, the only thing that supported the seal in the dimension was the royal family's kismet. But that kismet was not something that only the royal family possessed. One Dao sect was the sect that the Emperor of Ancient Zhang had personally created in the past. It had also inherited kismet, which was why Lin Dongdong's actions as a great Dao paragon and one Dao sect's change of laws had caused a loud bang in the end. Su Ming's role in this was even more crucial. He was the one who made the spirit of the tree of Dao verification, and the childlike voice sense a sense of closeness from him. That closeness woke it up and made it willing to help, all for the sake of returning home. At that moment, as the first and second layers had completely shattered and countless cultivators' bodies were torn apart, their blood was instantly absorbed by the tree of Dao verification, causing the huge tree trunk to distort and exude a power that could destroy the world to spread out. That power swept out in all directions and reached the third layer, which had yet to collapse, but was still trembling violently. It reached the tree crown, and a roar seemed to come from the tree of Dao verification. "I want to go home." When that voice echoed in the air, it immediately shook the sky and earth. A huge wave of impact instantly tumbled out of the tree of Dao verification's crown with loud bangs. Lin Dongdong was the first to bear the brunt of it. Once the impact crashed into him, blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. He instantly fell back, and shock appeared on his face. He had already noticed the destruction of the first and second layers of the dimension, and he also noticed that this place had lost all connection with Ancient Zhang. He also noticed that his connection with one Dao sect had been severed. In fact, he could not leave the first prince's body, and he was completely trapped in this place. This caused his face to turn pale. As he retreated swiftly, he looked at the tree of Dao verification. Besides astonishment, there was also a hint of terror that had not appeared in him for countless years. He was not the only one who reacted that way. The wave of impact tumbled in all directions. It lifted the sky and fell to the ground. The second prince coughed up blood and let out a shrill scream of pain. If the headless figure had not turned around and used his back to withstand the impact, the second prince would have definitely died in an instant with his level of cultivation. Even so, the second prince was still bleeding non-stop. The headless figure shuddered and was forced tens of thousands of feet back. Only then did he manage to gain a stable footing. If they were already in such a state, then it was even more so for the other disciples from one Dao sect and Azura clan in the third layer. The instant the tree of Dao verification shuddered, the cultivators were unable to fight back. Their bodies were instantly torn apart by the distortions of the ripples in space, and their bodies and souls were destroyed. The only one who was not affected by the impact was Su Ming. Su Ming stood on the tree crown. His body swayed along with the tree crown, but he did not sense any form of impact. At that moment, he sat down without any hesitation. His cultivation base was tumbling about in his body. It was the effects of the phala, and it had already erupted in his body. The miraculous thing about the phala was that it could allow a person to reach a breakthrough in their level of cultivation and become a Dao paragon. Based on Gu Tai's description in the past, this powerful effect will be completed within a few days, but at that moment, Su Ming noticed that there seemed to be some sort of connection between the phala and his body. He had definitely not absorbed it within a few days, but had absorbed nearly half of it in an instant. At that moment, Su Ming could already sense how vast the phala was. The juice from the phala stirred up raging waves in his body, and they looked as if they had been set on fire. They roared continuously in Su Ming's body, and in an instant, they filled all the veins in his body, causing the third eye at the center of his brow to open. It revealed a sea of fire that surged into the sky. Su Ming's 4 complete Dao spirits sat in the sea of fire and seemed to be trembling. The 5th Dao spirit, which was still in an illusory state, also started distorting violently at that moment. Invisible booms echoed continuously in Su Ming's body, and they grew stronger with each passing moment. In the end, it was as if Su Ming's body had turned into a huge drum. Every single time it trembled, it would cause his entire body to roar. The power of the Phala was so terrifying that it caused Su Ming to bleed from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. But he still gritted his teeth and persevered. However, the more he persevered, the crazier he felt, as if there was not a single part of his body that did not hurt. He wanted to kill, wanted to attack, wanted to vent his anger, but it was not the time. Su Ming had a vague understanding that the power of the Phala could allow a person to become a Tao paragon, and the main point was to endure it. The longer he could endure it, the more shocking the power that would erupt from him would be. Lin Dong Dong and the second prince saw it clearly. Killing intent appeared in Lin Dong Dong's eyes, but there was also an indescribable terror in them. He was naturally not afraid of Su Ming, but of the tree of Tao verification. The dimension in the place had been destroyed, and he had lost his path back to ancient Zong. However, he clearly cannot accept it. At that moment, he turned around and completely ignored Su Ming. He turned into a long arc and left swiftly, intending to search for traces that would allow him to rush out of this place and return to ancient Zong. As for the second prince, he could not accept it. His heart was filled with distortions, and his eyes were bloodshot. He glared at Su Ming, and madness appeared on his face. He could not accept that the Phala had been taken away by Su Ming, and he could not accept that Su Ming was absorbing the power of the Phala at that moment. He had Azura clan's full support, and he had been taken in as progenitor Xiao Luo's disciple. He was the second prince of ancient Zhang's royal family. There was no way he could accept it. That was why even if Lin Dong Dong left, he could not leave. He wanted to kill Su Ming. He wanted to refine him, and from there, he could retrieve the power of the Phala and devour it. In fact, at that moment, he no longer wanted to refine it. A look as if he wanted to devour someone appeared on his face. He wanted to devour Su Ming and seize back the power of the Phala that he believed belonged to him. However, with the tree of Tao verification around and the impact coming from it, it made it difficult for him to do so. Yet even so, the second prince's madness burned like flames. The moment Lin Dong Dong left, the tree of Tao verification swayed even more furiously. Its trunk moved, and the countless branches on the tree crown trembled, causing the world to show signs of collapse. The sky shattered, and the ground cracked. It was as if the apocalypse had arrived. "I want to go home," when the childlike voice roared again. The booming sound from the tree of Tao verification shook the sky and earth. Countless branches immediately split from the ancient tree and formed two huge hands that looked like the tree of Tao verification. They seized the sky and tore it to the sides. With it, the world roared, and the destruction of the world became even more severe. However, the sky could be torn apart, and space could be torn apart, but it could not tear apart the dimension in this place. And if it could not tear apart the dimension, it would mean that it could not open the door to the once glorious world. The second prince let out a piercing roar. As he spoke, he lifted his right hand, and a helmet immediately appeared on his palm. There were two horns on the helmet, and it looked incredibly ferocious. Once he lifted it, the second prince put it on his head. In an instant, his roar shook the sky and earth. His body continued growing, and in the blink of an eye, he grew to be 100-something feet tall. Judging by the looks of it, that was not his limit. Azura Ghost Tao, with the blood of the royal family running through my veins, I will nourish the ghosts in the world gathered together. Even as the words left his mouth, the second prince threw his head back and roared. He lifted his right hand, which transformed into something that looked like a ghost claw. His skin was green, and his nails were razor-sharp. Furthermore, a vicious bone spike had sprouted out of his right arm. His left arm also changed, and his body grew to about 200 feet tall. His presence surged into the sky, and he was already infinitesimally close to that of a Tao paragon. At that moment, his expression twisted, and he let out a pained roar. "Wuho! Bring me forward." At the instant he said those words, the headless man moved swiftly. He seized the second prince, and a three-colored screen of light appeared around him. It surrounded the area, and as he rushed forward, he withstood the astonishing power of the tree of Tao verifications, swaying and charged toward Su Ming. When he closed in, cracks immediately appeared on the headless man's body. The three-colored screen of light around him distorted as if it was about to shatter. When he was about 1,000 feet away from Su Ming, the three-colored screen of light crumbled, and a muffled bang came from the headless man's body. He grabbed the second prince and threw him at Su Ming. When the second prince roared and charged toward Su Ming, the headless man sat down cross-legged. His cultivation base spread out with a bang and enveloped the area. With his power alone, he fought against the tree of Tao verification, so that the second prince could have a little time to attack. Almost at the instant the second prince was about to devour Su Ming with madness and killing intent, Su Ming lifted his head. When he opened his eyes, a thick, blood-red light shone in them. "It's time for us to come to an end." Su Ming shuddered. It was the intense pain caused by the booming sounds in his body. At that moment, he had already reached his limit. When the second prince arrived, he would be met with Su Ming's explosive power. Chapter 1585. Almost at the instant the second prince closed in, Su Ming opened his eyes and stood up. Without any hesitation, he lifted his right hand and pointed at the incoming second prince. With it, a wave of impact immediately roared between Su Ming and the second prince. Under it, madness appeared on the second prince's face, and he instantly fell back. Su Ming took a step forward, and this time, he no longer used his finger. Instead, he used his palm. When the palm landed, the intense pain formed by the booming sounds in Su Ming's body instantly spilled out. Once it crashed into the second prince, an even more astonishing bang erupted from his body. With the loud bang, the second prince's 200 feet body tumbled backwards again. When he coughed up a mouthful of blood, he stared at Su Ming in shock. Su Ming shuddered, and blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth as well. But a brilliant light shone in his eyes. He could clearly sense that the intense pain in his body had faded away slightly. Without another word, Su Ming rushed forward again when the second prince retreated. This time, he threw a punch. At the instant it landed, the second prince let out a roar. He lifted his arms and pushed them forward. Immediately, an illusory figure that was 1,000 feet tall appeared behind him. It was entirely green, and it looked like a malicious spirit. As it roared ferociously, it shot through the second prince's body and charged at Su Ming. Azura Ghost Owl. When the second prince's voice reverberated in the air, the 1,000 feet tall malicious spirit crashed into Su Ming. Shocking booms reverberated in the air, and Su Ming coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. When he fell back, the originally illusory fifth overlapping Tao spirit in his third eye gained corporeal form and turned into a Tao spirit, causing Su Ming's level of cultivation to reach a breakthrough and truly reach the fifth level of Tao spirit realm. With just one more step, he would be able to move past Tao spirit realm and become a Tao paragon. This is impossible. This is impossible. Disbelief appeared on the second prince's face. When his face contorted, the madness in him grew stronger. That's impossible. There's no way you could have absorbed the Tao fruit so quickly. From ancient times until now, it took at least 3 days to absorb the Tao fruit. There's no way you could have absorbed it in such a short time. With a loud roar, the second prince rushed forward again. This time, when he closed in on Su Ming, his body swelled up again. From his original height of 200 feet, he grew to about 300 feet. More bone spikes appeared on his body, and his level of cultivation also rose to infinitesimally close to that of a Tao paragon. Su Ming lifted his head swiftly. Once he wiped off the blood at the corners of his mouth, a powerful fighting spirit appeared in his eyes. At that moment, the pain in his body had mostly disappeared, but it was still there. Under that pain, his fighting spirit grew even stronger. In the vast expanse, there has never been anything impossible. When Su Ming said those words coldly, he leaped forward and charged towards the second prince. He did not use any divine abilities or arts. He only used the simplest and most direct method to vent the intense pain in his body. The two of them instantly closed in on each other on the tree crown. At the instant, booming sounds surged into the sky. The childlike voice of the tree of Tao verification echoed in the air once more with determination. "I want to go home." When the voice shook the sky and deafened everyone's ears, the tree of Tao verification's two hands formed by countless branches tore the sky again with a bang. With that, the entire sky rumbled, and a huge rift was forcibly torn open in the collapsing sky. Along with it, the countless illusory nets shattered, causing a huge scar to appear within the rift in the sky, in the midst of the shattered air. It was a scar that seemed to be the entrance to another world, a scar left behind after it was sealed off. The scar was so big that it seemed to be boundless. It was easy to imagine that the person who sealed off the gap in the past had to have an astonishing level of cultivation. A huge talisman could be clearly seen on the scar. It was crimson, and there was a huge mark on it. At that moment, it was flashing. If anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see that the scar formed by the sealing off the entrance to another world came from the talisman. The threads that seemed to have sewn the entrance together had spread out from the talisman. If anyone took the talisman, they would be able to open the sealed entrance, and they would be able to see the once glorious world. At the same time, the sky was torn apart. The edges of the cracks continued shattering, and the ground was completely shattered. At that moment, Su Ming and the second prince fell back in the midst of the booming sounds. Su Ming coughed up blood, but he threw his head back and laughed. In his third eye, at the center of his brow, an illusory figure appeared around the 5 overlapping Tao spirits. It was the embryo of Su Ming's 6th overlapping Tao spirit. Once the embryo was formed and gained corporeal form, Su Ming would have 6 overlapping Tao spirits. Once he fused with them, he would become a Tao immortal. The second prince's expression changed, but the unwillingness to admit defeat in his eyes made him unable to care about anything else. With a roar, he lifted his right hand and swung it. Immediately, armor appeared on his body. In the blink of an eye, a complete set of armor appeared on his body. At the same time, his body swelled up again. This time, he was 500 feet tall. His cultivation base instantly erupted, and he possessed the power of a Tao immortal. Today, no matter what price I have to pay, I will snatch back the phala that belongs to me. The second prince roared. A vortex immediately appeared in his right eye. It had become much weaker, as if some form of consciousness was trying to break free from it. Azura's disaster, Tao of reincarnation die, the second prince roared. Black fog surged into the sky around him, and he instantly charged at Su Ming. The black fog around him turned into a huge vortex. It rotated with loud rumbles, as if it was the cycle of reincarnation. At that moment, his body, which was 500 feet tall, looked like a malicious spirit in the black fog. This was clearly some sort of art from Azura clan, and it allowed him to use a ghost to verify Azura. The second prince knew that his time was limited. The headless figure had already withstood the mighty pressure from the tree of Tao verification for him, but he could not hold on for long. Once he could no longer hold on, it would be difficult for him to fight against Su Ming on the tree crown. That was why when he attacked, he had already brought out his full strength. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The intense pain in his body had already lessened, and he could no longer release all of it with a normal method. He lifted his right hand, and a huge axe immediately appeared in his hand. He sucked in a deep breath. At the instant the second prince came over, the axe swung down, and he poured out the last of his pain into the arm that held the axe. It surged into his arm, and he vented it to the fullest. The world roared. As loud bangs reverberated in the air, the second prince let out a shrill scream of pain. His left arm was separated from his body. When he fell back, the vortex in his right eye shattered, and Di Tian, who had been suppressed in it, replaced the second prince's right eye. He saw Su Ming with just one glance. Su Ming tumbled backwards at that moment and coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. In fact, his chest had caved in. When blood filled the air, his laughter echoed in the air. His body was continuously recovering, and the sixth overlapping Tao spirit in the third eye at the center of his brow instantly gathered together. A powerful cultivation base rose from Su Ming's body with a bang. Sixth overlapping Tao spirit fused with Tao paragons. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. At that moment, when the crack in the sky appeared, the scar was revealed, and the talisman shone. The tree of Tao verification started trembling violently. Home! My home is over there. The tree of Tao verification shuddered, and a vast amount of power instantly erupted from it. It gathered on the tree of Tao verification's hands, and it charged towards the talisman paper on the scar to tear it off. The entire world seemed to have come to a standstill at that instant. In fact, the tree of Tao verification's gigantic body flew up slightly when it grabbed the talisman. However, the moment the tree of Tao verification's hands touched the talisman and was about to tear it apart, the mark on the talisman suddenly flashed 9 times in succession. Every single time it flashed, a black bolt of lightning would descend with a rumble. The lightning contained an indescribable power, and that power, it was enough to destroy great Tao paragons. The 9 black bolts of lightning all landed on the tree of Tao verification, causing cracks to appear on the tree, but that was nothing. After the 9 bolts of lightning, the air around the talisman paper on the scar distorted, and an indistinct figure appeared. The figure was dressed in a wide black robe. His face was expressionless as he stared coldly at the tree of Tao verification beneath him. Punishment, he said flatly. He lifted his right hand and pushed down on the tree of Tao verification beneath him. With it, the tree of Tao verification roared nonstop, and the raised hands were torn to shreds. It's you. You're the one who destroyed my homeland. It's you. The child's voice was weeping and filled with anger. When it echoed in the air, a figure appeared on the tree of Tao verification's crown. It was a boy who looked to be about 5 or 6 years old. At the same time, Lin Dong Dong, who was searching for the exit in the third layer, shuddered when he saw the black-robed man in the sky. Disbelief appeared on his face. The Emperor, this isn't the Emperor's real body. This is a wisp of his imperishable will he left here. This is the final method he used to suppress the tree of Tao verification. It might be an imperishable will, but it still possesses a portion of the Emperor's power. Excitement appeared on Lin Dong Dong's face. He seemed to have seen the path back to ancient Zong. As long as the tree of Tao verification was suppressed again, then with Lin Dong Dong's level of cultivation, he was confident that he could open a dimensional rift in 10,000 years and return to ancient Zong. Please vote for me. Chapter 1586. At the instant the black-robed man looked at the ancient tree of Tao verification with an aloof expression beyond the talisman that looked like a scar in the crack in the sky. The 5 or 6-year-old child who had appeared on the tree crown swiftly lifted his right hand and pushed down on the tree of Tao verification beneath him. With that one push, the child's youthful voice echoed in the shattered world with an unforgettable tone. Tao verification. At the instant he said those words, an indescribably great suction force came from the child. It was so great that it instantly covered the entire tree of Tao verification, as if an astonishing suction force had erupted from the ancient tree. At that instant, the crumbling sky around the ancient tree of Tao verification tumbled backwards. As it distorted, it turned into ripples that charged at the child. The entire sky looked as if it had been lifted. It shattered layer by layer and distorted as if it had melted into ripples. When the sky dissipated as if it had been sucked away by the ancient tree of Tao verification, the sky was no longer the sky. Instead, it had turned into a vast expanse of emptiness. At the same time, under the suction force, the ground, which had already crumbled to pieces, rumbled once more and shattered. The mountains and rivers on the ground were destroyed. Once the ground disappeared completely, it turned into a dust storm that charged at the tree of Tao verification. Even the collapsed second and first layers tumbled about at that moment. When they were destroyed, they became part of the dust storm and were sucked away by the gigantic tree of Tao verification that stood tall in the air. The suction force did not just shake the world, but also cultivators. At that instant, the second prince was the first to be unable to withstand it. His body tumbled backwards and charged at the ancient tree of Tao verification. With a bang, he was stuck to the ancient tree, unable to move an inch. Terror appeared on his face, and his headless figure shuddered. It was difficult for him to fight back against the madness of the ancient tree of Tao verification. His body was instantly surrounded by countless branches, as if he had become a part of the ancient tree. There was also great Tao venerate Lin Dong Dong. Even though he was slightly further away, he was still affected by the suction force. No matter how hard he tried to resist, he could not stop his body from being pulled over by the suction force. Like the second prince, he became a part of the ancient tree. Only Su Ming could sense the astonishing suction force from the ancient tree of Tao verification filling the world, but his body was not affected in the slightest. At that moment, the 6 Tao spirits and his third eye were swiftly fusing together, causing Su Ming to have no time to pay attention to them. He sat down in space and sensed the process of his Tao spirits turning into Tao paragons. At the same time, the child in the tree of Tao verification slowly pressed his right hand against the tree crown. The tree of Tao verification immediately started rumbling and rumbling. A loud bang that shook the sky and earth rang out. The tree of Tao verification seemed to have withered, as if all its power had been sucked away and fused into the child's right hand. When he lifted his head, he stared at the shadow of the emperor in the sky. Tao verification split open the sky. There was an indescribable resolve in the boy's youthful voice at that moment. It was his desire to return home that had reached its pinnacle. It was the peak of his desire to go home that had been suppressed to its limit after being sealed for countless years. At the instant he spoke, he flew up and turned into a long arc that charged towards the shadow of the Emperor of the Void. His body might have seemed weak, but he was so strong that he surpassed all the people in the dimension. His voice was youthful, but the emotions towards his home contained in his voice were so strong that it caused others' hearts to clench in pain. He was not fast, but at that moment, he had gathered all the power from the ancient tree of Tao verification, along with the cultivation bases of the first and second princes. No matter what their wishes were, at that moment, they had all become a part of the ancient tree of Tao verification. With resolve and longing for his home, the boy called How instantly appeared in front of the black-robed man, the indestructible will of the Emperor of Ancient Zong. He lifted his right hand and tore at the Emperor of Ancient Zong. Almost at the instant How tore at the Emperor of Ancient Zong, the black-robed man's expression remained the same. It was as if he, as a will, did not have any fluctuations of emotion. At that moment, he only lifted his right hand and pushed down at the incoming How. Punishment. It was still one word, but at the instant he said it, a dark light that shook the sky and earth erupted from the black-robed man's right palm. Within were 9 black bolts of lightning that instantly charged towards How. In an instant, they crashed into each other, and the 9 bolts of lightning let out a shocking rumble. All of them landed on How's body, but at the instant they landed, they disintegrated at the same time and turned into large arcs of electricity that flowed through How's body. From the distance, How looked as if he had charged through the 9 bolts of lightning and closed in on the black-robed man with an unstoppable force. But at the instant he touched the black-robed man, an endless amount of dark light shone from the lines of the black-robed man's right hand. Each of them seemed to have turned into invisible mountain ranges that came to suppress How and the tree of Tao verification. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. Hao Hao's right hand crashed into the black-robed man's right hand, and the booming sounds turned into an impact that seemed to be able to tear apart everything. When it tumbled backwards in all directions, Hao Hao's voice was filled with resolve. Once he spoke, the black-robed man's body instantly turned into an illusion. The illusion became more indistinct. When the black-robed man looked as if he was about to disappear, he closed his eyes. When he reopened them, he pushed his right hand forward. With it, the booming sounds in the air instantly became several times stronger, causing Hao Hao's body to look as if it had been swept away by a violent gust of wind. With an unwillingness to admit defeat and grief, the child disappeared. At the same time, the tree of Tao verification shuddered. A large number of its branches crumbled and shattered. Even the gigantic tree crown that could replace the sky shattered. Hao Hao's figure appeared on the tree crown again. This time, he was very indistinct, and he seemed to be crying. He stared at the air, at the scar in the crack, as if he was looking at his home. As part of the tree of Tao verification crumbled, the second prince coughed up blood. He charged away and summoned the headless figure. It turned into a long arc that instantly left the tree of Tao verification in terror. It was the same for Lin Dongdong. His face was pale, and he immediately widened the distance between him and the tree of Tao verification without any hesitation. When he turned his head around, a rare look of terror appeared in his eyes. It was also at that moment that Su Ming's eyes flew open. Almost at the instant he did so, the 6 Tao spirits in the third eye at the center of his brow completed their final fusion. They transformed from Tao spirits into Tao paragons. At the instant he became a Tao paragon, Su Ming's 6th level Tao paragon shone with a golden light in his third eye. That light was incredibly strong, and it looked like it could dye the world gold. The Tao paragon's vast power rotated continuously in Su Ming's body at that instant. It spread out and swept in all directions, causing his hair to move without wind. An astonishing power erupted from his body. Tao venerables, also known as Tao immortals, could be attained at the 6th tier. At the 7th level, he would reach the perfection of Tao master. At the 8th level, he would become a great Tao master. At that moment, Su Ming had already stepped into Tao paragon realm. In fact, he had a vague feeling that he was about to reach completion, and he could see great Tao paragons. Help me, help me. You said that you wanted to go home with me. Almost at the same time, Su Ming became a Tao paragon. Hao Hao's voice traveled into his ears slowly with sorrow. Su Ming lifted his head and saw a 5-year-old boy staring at him from the tree crown. He saw the boy's determination and sorrow. No one else could understand it, but Su Ming could understand it because he was the same as Hao Hao. They had both lost their homes. I want to go home. I want to go home. Help me, help me. The boy mumbled softly while staring at Su Ming. Each of his words touched Su Ming's heart. At some point in time, he had also been like the boy. He had lost his home and all the familiar faces. He was alone in the world and quietly thought about everything in his memories. How should I help you? Su Ming asked softly while staring at the boy. He had no reason to refuse him, and neither did he want to. If Hao Hao was not around, Su Ming would not have been able to obtain the Phala, and if Hao Hao was not around, he might have already been killed by the first and second princes. Regardless of whether it was to repay him or because Su Ming's heart had been touched at that moment, he wanted to help the boy and send him home. I'm the spirit of Tao verification. I can't tear that seal. The emperor of ancient Zhangs has gathered on me, but you are not. You can tear that seal. Once the seal is torn, we can go home. Hao Hao stood up from the tree crown and stared at Su Ming. A strong determination appeared in his eyes. His gaze made Su Ming fall silent for a moment before resolution appeared in his eyes. He moved and instantly appeared on the tree crown beside Hao Hao. He lowered his head to stare at the boy, and the boy also lifted his head to stare at Su Ming. When their gazes met, Su Ming saw the clarity in the boy's eyes and the purity of his heart. He also saw his desire and determination to go home, along with the loneliness and sorrow hidden in his heart. Similarly, during that instant, The boy also saw Su Ming's world and saw Su Ming's death. Help me go home. I will also help you go home. Let's go together. The boy sensed an indescribable sense of closeness from Su Ming again. He lifted his hand and held Su Ming's hand. At the instant their hands touched, Su Ming's eyes suddenly focused. A vast power instantly surged towards Su Ming as if he was transferring his cultivation base to him. Chapter 1587. The power of that cultivation base swam through Su Ming's body, causing his presence to swiftly increase exponentially. In fact, Su Ming immediately noticed that the power of that cultivation base was about the same as the feeling of Phala, except for the intense pain that brought him extreme pain. The pain he felt when he swallowed the Phala was still fresh in Su Ming's memory, but when Hao Hao held his hand and sent the power of cultivation base into him, he did not feel such pain. However, the feeling of his cultivation base exploding forth was even stronger. You? Su Ming stared at the boy before him and sighed softly. I can't bring the tree of Tao verification back to our homeland. Instead of leaving it here, it would be better for me to give it to you. Only by doing so will you be able to use your power to tear through the seal and let us go home. The boy stared at Su Ming, and his eyes were clear. Su Ming was silent. His cultivation base increased exponentially with loud bangs. The power surging into him was so strong that his presence instantly became stronger. It filled the world, and due to the vast amount of power surging into him, Su Ming could not immediately absorb it, which was why the number of Tao paragons in his third eye did not increase, but the power of cultivation base that had accumulated in his body instantly surpassed that of Tao paragons. There was no need for Su Ming to determine just how strong it was. He could sense that as his level of cultivation increased, the boy gradually became weaker, but the clarity and determination in his eyes did not decrease. Instead, they became stronger. At the same time, the partially collapsed tree of Tao verification started withering. It started withering from its roots, as if all its life force and power had been sent to Su Ming through Hao Hao's hand. It was a gift from Hao Hao, a gift from the tree of Tao verification. Along with the gift was a sense of determination. Su Ming stared at the boy, and after a long while, he said softly, I promise that no matter what it takes, I will send you home. The boy smiled. His smile was pure and beautiful. He held Su Ming's hand, and a hint of dependence appeared on his face. It was as if only by doing so could he feel safe. It was as if Su Ming's promise was everything to him in the world. The withering of the tree of Tao verification grew more and more intense. Its roots had already withered to a limit and were gradually reduced to ashes. Lin Dong Dong's eyes were filled with shock when he saw this. At the same time, an unprecedented sense of jealousy rose within him. This is giving the tree of Tao verification's life force and everything it has accumulated over the years to the third prince. Damn it! Damn it! How could he possibly have such a fortuitous encounter? Once he absorbed the cultivation of the tree of Tao verification, once he completely integrated with it, what realm would he reach? From ancient times until now, this is an unprecedented good fortune. Red appeared in Lin Dong Dong's eyes as he glared at Su Ming, but he did not dare act recklessly. The jealousy in his heart grew stronger, and eventually it turned into an even stronger desire to kill Su Ming. If he was in such a state, it was even more so for the second prince. The second prince was glaring at Su Ming at that moment. He could also see Su Ming's serendipity at that moment, and the crazed jealousy in his heart replaced all his thoughts. This should have belonged to me. It should have belonged to me. You snatched my Phala and even my serendipity. If you weren't around, the Phala would have belonged to me, and this serendipity would have belonged to me. In the midst of the second prince's madness, Di Tian's figure in his right eye gained more corporeal form. When he looked at Su Ming, a complicated look appeared on Di Tian's face. But their jealousy and killing intent could not affect Su Ming in the slightest. Under the vast power of his cultivation base, the tree of Tao verification's withering gradually spread. 10/10, 2/10, 3/10. When 7/10 and 8/10 of the tree withered from the distance, most of the tree of Tao verification seemed to have withered. Only a small portion of the tree crown remained. As for Su Ming, the strength of his level of cultivation was difficult to describe with words. The face of the boy beside him gradually turned pale. His body started to fade away, but the clarity in his eyes and the smile on his face were the same as before. There was determination in his eyes, as well as a sadness that made Su Ming's heart ache. This was a child who would do anything just to return home. When Su Ming sighed softly in his heart, the tree crown completely withered away. The entire tree of Tao verification, the towering tree that had stood tall for countless years, completely disappeared at that moment. Its glory had risen to power in the world of the past and remained in ancient Zong. Right then, it gathered on Su Ming's body and became the boy's hope to return home. As the tree of Tao verification disappeared, the boy gradually lost his strength. He looked like he was about to let go of Su Ming's hand, but at the instant he was about to let go, Su Ming grabbed the boy's hand and sent a gentle aura and his cultivation base into the boy's body. "Don't sleep. You have to watch me bring you home." Su Ming crouched down and stared at the boy, who had already faded away. He patted his head. The boy stared at Su Ming, and after a long while, he nodded seriously. "I won't sleep. I'll watch the way home." A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. It was a very gentle smile. Once he patted the boy's head again, he stood up, and when he lifted his head, he saw the Emperor's indestructible will manifested from the talisman on the scar in the crack in space. At the instant he looked over, the black-robed man also cast his gaze on Su Ming. Su Ming stared at him, at the face that he would never forget. It was Xianzang's face. Su Ming had noticed it before, but he had never stared at it like he did at that moment. "It doesn't matter whether it's Xianzang or ancient Zong, we meet again." Su Ming's voice was filled with his obsession. At the instant he spoke, he turned into a long arc that charged into the sky. He was getting closer. In an instant, when Su Ming closed in on the sky, he lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky. The black-robed man also lifted his right hand. He did the same thing and spoke the same words. "Punishment." Booming sounds echoed in the air. 9 bolts of black lightning instantly closed in on Su Ming. When they descended, Su Ming swung his right hand. His will erupted from him at full force, and the terrifying power of the tree of Tao verification that he had accumulated in his body also spilled out in a frenzy. As booming sounds echoed in the air and Su Ming's will echoed in the air, he swung his right hand and crashed into the 9 bolts of lightning. Loud booming sounds rang out nonstop. Each time a bolt of lightning landed on Su Ming's body, it would cause him a jolt, but it could not stop him from moving forward. When all 9 bolts of lightning shattered, the palm lines from the black-robed man's right hand, which had caused the tree of Tao verification to fail previously, came crashing down on Su Ming like a mountain. Su Ming could sense the suppression incredibly strongly at that moment. It was the power of 9 layers of suppression, and each layer was several times stronger than the previous. Once they overlapped with each other, they formed a huge seal that was as vast as the universe. A loud bang shot up, and blood trickled out of the corners of Su Ming's mouth. It was the first layer of suppression, and the second layer of suppression that followed immediately caused Su Ming's footsteps to come to a halt. He coughed up blood, and his eyes turned bloodshot. He let out a low growl and took a step forward without any hesitation, causing his right hand to crash into the black-robed man's right hand. At the same time, the third layer of suppression descended. It caused the black-robed man's body to become a little indistinct, and Su Ming instantly felt an intense pain as if his body was about to crumble. This time, he did not cough up blood. Instead, he stirred up his 4 great wills to fight against the third layer of suppression. In the midst of the booming sounds, all four of Su Ming's wills crumbled, but he withstood the third layer of suppression and used his power to fight against the fourth layer. Booming sounds echoed nonstop between Su Ming and the black-robed man's hands. With the power of the tree of Tao verification he had accumulated, Su Ming withstood the fourth, fifth, sixth, and even the seventh layer of suppression. Most of the black-robed man's body had already turned into an illusion. The blood on Su Ming's robes dyed his robes red, and when his right hand let out a bang and shattered under the seventh layer of suppression, Su Ming roared. At the same time he lifted his left hand, 3 words tumbled out of his mouth. God of Berserker's transformation. This was the first time Su Ming executed the God of Berserker's transformation after he woke up. As he spoke, his body instantly swelled up, but it only lasted for an instant before it turned into a rain of blood. As Su Ming's body swelled up and crumbled, his blood gushed out of his body. Even after paying the price, Su Ming still stood tall in space. He withstood the 8th layer of suppression. I don't believe that I can't tear apart your seal. Su Ming threw his head back and laughed. As he did so, a bloody stench spread out from his body, along with a madness that was buried in his bones. Even if my right hand is broken, I still have my left hand. Even if my left hand is broken, I still have my head. Booming sounds echoed in space. Under the 9th layer of suppression, the black-robed man's body turned completely illusory, as if only his palm was left. At the instant the talisman behind his palm was revealed, Su Ming's left hand shattered. Without any hesitation, he rammed his head against the black-robed man's right hand. Booming sounds echoed in space. Su Ming no longer had the 4 great wills. He had also released all of his cultivation base and shattered the God of Berserker's transformation, but he still had his determination and his belief. It was the belief that he could resurrect all the dead, and he still had his promise. He had promised Hao that no matter what price he had to pay, he would send him home. That was Su Ming's promise, and he would absolutely not give up on it. What he rammed into was destiny. What he rammed into was Su Ming's unwillingness to admit defeat. What he rammed into was Su Ming's desire for his homeland and his determination to resurrect the familiar faces. Many years ago, after the bald crane died, Su Ming had also rushed towards Xianzong, which was filled with the aura of death in a crazed manner. Many years later, on that day, he still rammed into ancient Zong in a crazed manner. He would not turn his head back until he crashed into the wall. Even if he ran into the wall, he would shatter it and rush into the vast expanse. This was his determination, a determination that was easy for a normal person to say, but difficult to do. The South was a difficult place. Even Lin Dong Dong and the others were shocked by the tragic scene. But after that shock, they were pleasantly surprised. They cursed Su Ming viciously that his body and soul would be destroyed under the emperor's indestructible will. However, the curse was bound to fail. As booming sounds shook the sky and earth, and the entire 3rd layer completely shattered, blood trickled down Su Ming's forehead, and the black-robed man's right hand crumbled. At the instant it was torn to pieces, Su Ming, who had lost his hands, used his mouth to bite down on the talisman paper on the crack on the scar, and tore it to the side. The seal shattered. Chapter 1588. He would spill his blood on the heavens. At that moment, Su Ming no longer had arms, but when he used his mouth to tear off the talisman, it was filled with his determination, his promise, and an impulse that he had rarely experienced over the years. The last time he had been so impulsive was when he was young in Dark Mountain Tribe. At that time, he had been bound by his elder in his house and was not allowed to join the Battle of Dark Mountain. At that time, Su Ming had descended into madness with bloodshot eyes, and right then, he did again. This should not have happened in his current life, because many years had passed. Su Ming was no longer the child he was in the past. His intelligence was so great that he could control his impulses, but a person could not think through everything clearly. Sometimes, he had to follow his heart. If Su Ming had looked at the battle of the tree of Tao verification tearing apart the sky calmly, he would not have fought so hard for the boy called How How. After all, everyone was selfish, even if the boy called How How had once helped him. But if he had to pay such a price just because of How How's help, then he would have risked his life and death. To Su Ming, who was determined and wanted to resurrect all the familiar faces, perhaps he should not have done it, because tearing off the talisman was incredibly dangerous. If he died, then all of Su Ming's previous efforts would have been in vain. From a rational perspective, no matter how he looked at it, Su Ming's actions were incredibly unwise. But there were times when rationality was not everything, and calmness was not everything. He had to have a clear conscience. It was easy to say that one had a clear conscience, but how many people could truly do it? Questioning one's heart was to act according to the feelings in one's heart. Even if it was dangerous, one had to repay those who were kind to him. How Hao's voice telling him to go home had also moved Su Ming greatly. Help me, I will help you, or perhaps, I will help you, and you will help me. It was a very simple sentence, but no matter how rational a person was, they would find it difficult to do it, especially when the price was so great, but Su Ming still chose to do it. At that moment, Su Ming did not think about whether it was right or wrong. He did not think about what he would gain or lose. From the depths of his heart, he simply wanted to help the child go home. At that moment, the air rumbled. As Su Ming descended and tore off the talisman, the scar on the seal instantly cracked, and a gap was revealed. At the instant the gap was formed, the entire third layer collapsed with a bang. The shattered space brought with it a destructive force that could bury all lives. When it swept out in all directions, Su Ming's body fell downwards, but a figure flashed by his side. The boy called How How could clearly see the path home, but he did not immediately take a step forward. Instead, he appeared beside Su Ming and hugged him. Help me, and I'll help you. When the youthful voice reached Su Ming's ears, a smile appeared on his face. He saw the boy called How How carrying him and charging toward the scar in the sky. Let's go home, How How said softly, and a longing for home appeared in his eyes. Go home. Su Ming mumbled and closed his eyes. As How How hugged him, he turned into a long arc, and like a shooting star, he instantly rushed into the crack in the scar. At the same time, the dimension of the third layer crumbled to pieces. At the instant the destructive power rampaged about, Lin Dong Dong, the second prince, and a headless figure were forced to turn into long arcs and rush towards the crack as the dimension of the third layer crumbled. Only there was a chance of survival. If they stayed, then even with Lin Dong Dong's level of cultivation, he would be buried together with the entire third layer. Their figures instantly charged into the crack in the scar. Almost at the instant they disappeared, a shocking rumble came from the entire third layer. Under this rumble, the third layer shattered and disappeared into nothingness. As the third layer's dimension shattered, it was as if a person's eyes were slowly closing. When they were completely shut, the world turned black. Everything disappeared, as if it no longer existed. Su Ming had no idea how much time had passed when a ray of sunlight landed on his eyelids. It looked as if it could pierce through his eyelids and fuse into his pupils, causing him to feel as if the world was no longer black but pink. He slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the blue sky and the gentle but not piercing sun. Sunlight fell into his eyes, and How Hao's voice reached his ears. You're awake. There was happiness in that voice. When it landed in Su Ming's ears, he slowly sat up and saw How Hao sitting beside him. The boy, who was about 5 or 6 years old, was smiling happily at that moment. His smile was incredibly innocent, and it was brimming with happiness and happiness. However, compared to the ruins around him, that happiness and happiness seemed to be incredibly precious. The land around him was a wreckage of wreckage. Dust fell from the sky, as if it had been buried for an unknown number of years. Su Ming could still vaguely see the mountains and rivers in the past. He could still vaguely hear the sounds of laughter in the past. But in the next breath, regardless of whether it was vaguely or vaguely, everything turned into nothingness. The only things left behind were the marks left behind by a raging fire. An aura of death filled the area. Perhaps it wasn't formed because of death. Perhaps it was because this place had been devoid of the aura of the living for far, far too long. Gradually, a strangeness appeared, and silence appeared. Then, an aura of death was born. This is... Su Ming averted his gaze from the area. His pupils reflected all the wreckage he saw when he swept his gaze past it, bearing witness to the past glory of this place. This is Hao Hao's home, but its appearance has changed. I can't quite find it, but I remember the sunlight, the night sky, and the presence of this place. Hao Hao was silent for a while, as if he was feeling slightly downcast, but soon he lifted his head and put on a happy smile. It was as if he had buried all his unhappiness deep in his heart, as if he was continuously telling himself to be happy and satisfied, that this was his home. When that smile landed in Su Ming's eyes, he felt as if he had seen tears. In silence, Su Ming noticed that his originally lost arms had reappeared. This scene caused Su Ming to fall into deep thought. When he looked at Hao Hao again, he noticed that his body seemed to have become even more indistinct than before he fell unconscious. "You?" Su Ming sighed softly. He lifted his right hand and patted Hao Hao's head. The boy stared at Su Ming happily. Great reliance appeared on his face and in his eyes. "You help me, and I will help you." The boy's smile became even more innocent. When he stared at Su Ming, the reliance in his eyes became even stronger. This was a child who was already afraid of being alone. Su Ming was his only support, and he did not want to lose him, because if he did, he would return to the loneliness of the past. He was afraid of that loneliness. Su Ming was silent. After a long while, he nodded. When he sat down to meditate, he slowly closed his eyes. In this unfamiliar world, Su Ming might not feel too unfamiliar, but his cultivation base was everything. At that moment, the moment he circulated his cultivation base, he noticed that some of the cultivation base that had surged into him from Hao Hao had fused with his body. Even though he did not fuse much with it, the seven shadow of the 6 overlapping Tao paragons appeared in Su Ming's third eye. The vast amount of cultivation base in Su Ming's body gave him a strong feeling that if he could refine all of it, he would be able to form his 8th overlapping Tao paragon and become a great Tao paragon himself. Time trickled by. When dusk arrived, the world gradually darkened. When the night sky was filled with stars, Su Ming opened his eyes and saw Hao Hao by his side. He was staring at the sky with a dazed look on his face. In that daze, Su Ming seemed to see tears at the corners of Hao Hao's eyes. But when he took a closer look, he did not see any tears. Days passed just like that. Half a month later, Su Ming brought Hao Hao through the wasteland. They walked through the world filled with the aura of death. And just like that, they continued walking. They walked past abandoned cities, but they did not see anyone. Even the first prince and the others had been scattered once they descended into the world. No one knew where they were. Hao Hao stood at the edge of a pit that looked like it was in the sky. He stared at it, and after a long while, he said softly, "This was once a lake. I still remember this place." Hao Hao closed his eyes, and there was nostalgia in his voice. Su Ming stood by the side and stared at the sinkhole that was once a lake. He stared at the dust and cracks in it while he accompanied Hao Hao in remembering the past. Several days later, when they left, the sinkhole was still the same. They walked past the wasteland, the mountains and rivers that were once there, and they arrived at the seaside. When they looked over, the sea had turned into a desert. It was just as boundless as before, but one of them represented life, and the other represented silence. One of them was the line between the sky and the sea, and the other was the edge of the sand. They were as vast as ever, but the objects and people were no longer there. Hao Hao lowered his head and crouched down to grab a handful of sand. As he stared at it, his voice echoed in the air. 9 continents, 9 butterfly spirits. They once surrounded me, but now they're no longer around, Su Ming sighed softly. He could understand the anguish in the child's heart at that moment. He stroked his head gently with his right hand, and when Hao Hao stood up and hugged Su Ming, the 5-year-old boy seemed to be crying. After a long while, The boy lifted his head and stared at Su Ming while mumbling softly. I am the spirit of the tree of Tao verification. I don't have tears, but I want to cry. When I return to this place, my heart hurts. When Su Ming heard the youthful voice, his heart was moved again. He stared at the boy, then crouched down to pick him up. Everything will be fine. Su Ming carried him and walked into the distance. His voice echoed in the area and lingered for a long time, as if it was a beautiful promise. Bring me to the center, surrounded by the 9 continents. That is the place where I was born, the 5-year-old boy whispered while burying his head on Su Ming's shoulder. Chapter 1589. He walked past mountains and rivers, walked past ruins, looked at dust, and saw deserts. It was just like how in the previous breath, flowers were blooming like brocade, and in the next breath, all of them had withered. Whose face was not old, whose sighs were still around, and whose past was not beautiful. Su Ming sat before the ruins and watched the sun set. He sat beside mountains and rivers and watched dusk arrive. His laughter seemed to have pierced through time and echoed in his ears, causing people to lower their heads and be unable to tell what sort of karma existed between the beautiful past and the destroyed present, and what sort of cycles of life and death were contained within them. Otherwise, why would everything in the same world change during the time he opened and closed his eyes? Under the rising sun, Su Ming could be seen at the edge of the desert with the boy in his arms. When the sun rose, Su Ming's shadow was also elongated in the mountains and rivers, as if it would follow him forever. It was as if he had become an existence in the world and was guiding the wind and snow towards them. He walked through noon, walked through the 4 seasons. He moved through the desert, walked past the continents, and continued walking towards the heart at the center. He had no direction, and he did not want to fly either. He walked and walked in the once beautiful world, as if he was walking on his own path of Tao. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, until 100 years passed. During those 100 years, Su Ming remained the same. The boy was still in his arms. The two of them did not change, just like how the world did not change. It was the past. During spring, all manner of things came to life, but in this world, no green could be seen, no flowers could be seen, and there was no time to be broken. During summer, heat filled the air, and the entire land seemed to be distorted by the waves of heat. Only at that moment could people see some figures that had existed in the past through the distortions in the mountains and rivers. However, those figures were already distorted, and since they could not be straightened, they could only see memories. During autumn, there was no green in spring, which was why no red could be seen in autumn. Only the colorful clouds that would occasionally appear in the sky seemed to be unable to bear the monotony of the land, which was why they appeared to give people hope. During winter, snow fell from the sky, and when the cold wind blew, the world turned into a vast expanse. No one could see into the distance. The only things that could be seen were countless snowflakes. As they fell, they seemed to be trying to touch each other, but what decided whether 2 snowflakes could touch each other was not the snowflakes themselves, but the wind. But no matter what the will of the wind was, when the snowflakes fell to the ground, they could still gradually meet. It was just that the faces that met might not be the faces that fell together. Su Ming held the boy in his arms as he walked through the wind and snow. He walked past the depths of winter and welcomed spring. He sent away summer, and when he saw the red of autumn, it was still a snowy day. 200 years had passed. In this once glorious world, they gradually saw corpses that were either shattered, half-turned into ashes, or still in their former glory. Most of the corpses had already dried up. Some of them were in the ruins of the city, while others were scattered across the land, mountains, rivers, and deserts. There were countless corpses, some of them with men and women hugging each other before they died. There were also some mothers who instinctively protected their children, their bodies outlined together as they silently returned to the dust. In the midst of the boy's grief, Su Ming went with him to bury the corpses. They buried cities after cities, and they buried places after places on a drizzling afternoon in the summer of that year. Su Ming held the sleeping boy in his arms and stopped before an incredibly vast city in the distance. He saw a headless figure sitting cross-legged on the city. It was a gigantic city. It was the third incredibly large city Su Ming had seen on the third continent he had passed through. This was once the core of the continent, and it was where the capital was located. It was just like ancient Zhang's royal capital. In truth, the continent in this once glorious world was equivalent to all of ancient Zhang. As he stared at the figure sitting on the city, a complicated look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He had already recognized the person who followed the second prince. It was his eldest senior brother from his memories. However, he was not the first familiar person Su Ming saw in ancient Zhang. But even so, the soft sigh that came from the bottom of his heart still echoed in Su Ming's heart, refusing to disappear even after a long time had passed. The headless figure did not move. He sat cross-legged on the city and faced Su Ming. There was no sign of life in him, and neither was there any aura of death. It was as if he had been fixed in place and had turned into a statue. At the same time, the gate to the city suddenly opened on its own. Groups of soldiers in black armor walked out slowly with an orderly sound that caused the ground to tremble. Each of them had a thick aura of death around them. It was so thick that it instantly threw the sky into chaos, causing the sunlight in the afternoon to turn black. These people were the people of the land. After they died many years ago, they were refined into corpse puppets and turned into black armor, causing the city to turn from a city of death into a world of corpse puppets. Old friend, I am delighted to meet you in a foreign land. Please. At the instant the city gate was opened, an awe-inspiring voice reverberated in the air from within the palace and spread in all directions, falling into Su Ming's ears. That voice belonged to the second prince. Su Ming remained silent for a moment. Then, with the boy in his arms, he walked past the black-armored corpse puppets and entered the city. He saw an endless amount of people in the city, and all of them were corpse puppets. It was as if the entire city was bustling with activity at first glance, but when he took a closer look, he would find that it was just an illusion. Su Ming walked past the crowd and arrived outside the palace in the city. He looked at the already open door to the palace, and his gaze seemed to pass through the halls until he saw the person sitting on the throne in the middle of the palace. It was a person dressed in an emperor's robe and had an emperor's crown on his head. However, he was in the dark, and Su Ming could not see him clearly. In silence, Su Ming walked down the flag path and the stairs until he walked into the palace at the center. He saw the man sitting on the throne. He had the exact same face as the second prince, but the feeling he gave Su Ming was no longer one of familiarity. "Tian," Su Ming said softly. "It is me." The man in the emperor's robe smiled when he heard Su Ming's words. He stood up swiftly and walked out of the darkness. His appearance might be different from the Tian in Su Ming's memories, but his presence was that of no one else but Tian. There was still a vortex in Tian's right eye. It was like a seal, but right then, what was sealed in it was a struggling and roaring soul. That soul belonged to the second prince. Su Ming did not know how Tian had managed to turn the tables over 200 years, but with Tian's experience, his ability to scheme against Su Xian for 10,000 years, and his ability to connect with Su Ming's life matrix after Harmonious Morris Alba was destroyed, it was clear that he was definitely not someone the second prince could control. As long as he had a chance, he could replace the second prince. Su Ming, the most prodigious cultivator over the countless eons in the seventh Harmonious Morris Alba, the one who personally witnessed Harmonious Morris Alba's destruction, and who still chose to possess Xianzong before him. It has been a long time since we last met. When Tian said those words faintly, he took a step forward. His voice echoed in all directions and shook the entire palace. It was as if the world outside had become even more chaotic. "Because of you, I managed to avoid death. Because of you, I stepped into that illusory world with you. Over the years, I have been suppressed by that laughable second prince, but I have always understood that I am Tian. I am definitely not the second prince because he is just a prince, and I am the emperor of the immortals." Tion took another step forward. When his foot landed, he stood in front of Su Ming and met his gaze. Haven't you noticed that the world we are in right now is different from ancient Zhang? Ancient Zhang's world is fake, but this place is real. Tion swung his arm, and black smoke immediately filled the air. In an instant, it turned into a huge table between him and Su Ming. There was an endless amount of wine on it, and there were also some corpse puppets around it. They sang and danced soundlessly, but their stiff movements, the aura of death filling the air, and the dim light filled the place with a bizarre atmosphere. When we meet an old friend in a foreign land, we must treat each other with a feast. Su Ming, do you dare to drink the wine here? Tion smiled faintly. He was as arrogant as ever when he looked at Su Ming. Su Ming was silent. He held the boy in his arms and stared at Tion before him. Grief gradually filled his face. He was sad that the illustrious Tion and harmonious Morris Alba, Expanse Cosmos, had lost himself in the world. Perhaps it was because he was willing to lose himself, or else with Tion's determination, it would have been difficult for him to lose himself if he did not want to. Why did you do this? Su Ming sighed softly. To Su Ming, it did not matter whether Tion was an enemy or an old friend. Their life matrices had been severed when Su Ming let out his 9 Dao spirit voices. But no matter what, he was the second person besides Bei Qiong who possessed his own will among all the people Su Ming had met. Yet when he saw that Tion was lost, Su Ming could only sigh. He stared at Tion, and his gaze eventually landed on the area around the throne behind him. Over there, Su Ming seemed to have found his answer. Su Ming, do you dare to drink? Tion did not answer Su Ming's question. Instead, he spoke with a smile. As a brilliant light shone in his eyes, Su Ming cast him a deep glance, then turned around and walked out of the palace. Behind him, Tion's laughter echoed in the air. It seemed to be sending Su Ming off, and only when he left the palace did the laughter gradually fade away. The singing and dancing continued in the palace, but grief gradually appeared on Tion's face. He turned around quietly and walked to the side of the throne. There was a rune around it, and at that moment, under the dim light, several corpses could be vaguely seen. Each of the corpses had runic symbols carved in blood on their faces. Tion stood in a daze and stared at the corpses. Gradually, the gloomy look on his face disappeared, replaced by determination. I promised you that I would resurrect all of you in the new world. This is my promise, Tion mumbled. Tion muttered as he slowly sat down on his throne. His figure slowly returned to the darkness. He couldn't see clearly, and he couldn't see anything. Only when I believe that this place is real will all of you not suspect that this place is fake once you are resurrected. I will use my own loss in exchange for your existence. Even if this is wrong, I will admit to it. Anguish appeared on Tion's face. When he looked at the soundless corpse puppets in the darkness, he gradually heard a song, and gradually, the stiff corpse puppets in his eyes regained their spirit, as if they had gained life. However, his soft sigh could not stop the song and dance in his eyes, and neither could it travel out of the palace. No one could hear it. Between destruction and glory, on the border between reality and being lost, Tion was already willing to be lost when he heard the singing and dancing and saw the corpses that looked like real people. I will use this chapter to ask for a recommendation vote. Chapter 1590. The sun could not be seen in the sky. The entire sky was dark, as if the ghosts needed the night sky when they moved about, not the sun. Under this sort of sky, Su Ming walked into the city. At the moment he approached the city gate, he turned his head around to cast a glance at the palace. He could still vaguely sense Tion's presence over there. That presence had an air of farewell to him. It filled the city, as if it was slowly fusing with the ancient city that had been dead for an unknown number of years. Tion lived in his own world, deceiving his own consciousness to tell himself that everything in the place was real. Su Ming sighed softly. He understood Tion's resolve. That resolve was the resurrection of the corpses placed in the rune beside the throne. Only when I believe that this place is real can the people who have been resurrected not think that this place is fake. Dition. Su Ming fell silent. He felt as if he had gotten to know the person who had been embroiled in a grudge with him for thousands of years in harmonious Morris Alba's world. For the people he wants to resurrect, he chose to be lost and willingly sink into this place. Where is my path? In silence, Su Ming walked out of the city. When he was outside the city gate, he turned his head around for the second time and looked at the headless figure sitting cross-legged and meditating like a statue. Eldest senior brother. Su Ming stared at the figure on the city for a long, long time. When the boy in his arms opened his eyes, Su Ming turned around and walked into the distance. The boy lay in Su Ming's arms. He lifted his head and cast his gaze on the city before he asked softly, "Big brother, do you know the person who appeared on the city before?" "He's my senior brother," Su Ming mumbled without turning his head back. The boy did not continue speaking. He just stared at the headless figure on the city. Su Ming did not disturb his eldest senior brother's training, because his choice was different from Dition's. He chose another path, and it was not to be lost. Instead, he chose to break through all emptiness and open his own eyes to search for the true world. If he chose to be willing to be lost, then once Su Ming made his choice, he knew that he would see the headless figure open his eyes and see his eldest senior brother in his memories. In fact, Su Ming believed that he would definitely find a way to make other familiar faces appear before him in this world. However, all of this was still an illusion. Su Ming did not want to walk down this path. The path he wanted to walk down was different from Dition's. That path would be even more difficult, and it would be even longer. Dition did not manage to finish walking down that path. He chose to get lost, but at that moment, as Su Ming left into the distance under the dark sky, there was a faint sense of desolation in his eyes. He would absolutely not give up on his own path. Su Ming could understand why Dition did not continue down this path, but he himself would definitely reach the end of the path. In silence, Su Ming left into the distance until he disappeared into the horizon. He disappeared beyond the ancient city and left into the distance. "I saw tears at the corners of your senior brother's eyes," the boy said softly while lying on Su Ming's shoulder. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt. When he turned his head around, he stared at the city he could not see and sighed softly. Time passed, 10 years, 20 years, until another 100 years passed. In the once glorious world, Su Ming had already walked for a total of 300 springs and autumns. Year after year, day after day, he walked past ruins, mountains, rivers, deserts, and continents. When Su Ming arrived in front of a mountain on the 6th continent, he stopped quietly and closed his eyes. He chose to meditate under a night sky filled with stars. He sat there for 10 years. When Su Ming opened his eyes after 10 years of meditation, the entire world seemed to have become slightly different. Su Ming did not bother about his level of cultivation. Neither did he check just what realm he had reached. It was as if all of this was no longer important to him. What he cared about was not his level of cultivation, but his epiphany. His level of cultivation and his offensive abilities were just side effects in the process of gaining an epiphany. They were not his main focus. "Let's go." Su Ming stood up. The boy tugged at the corner of his robe and followed him into the distance. Time flowed by and did not change because of a person's will. Gradually, another 90 years went by. It was the 400 years Su Ming had spent in the world. He arrived at the 7th continent, and it was black. There was no end to it. There were no mountains, no rivers, and no plants. There was only endless darkness, as if it was cursed. From the distance, the black land without mountains looked like a black ocean, but there were no waves on it. It was like a dead sea. Perhaps there would be an ancient ship that would swim eternally on this ocean, and the person meditating on it would be the old man extermination from Su Ming's memories. "He's here." When Su Ming stepped on the continent, he spoke softly. Su Ming did not intentionally search for him on the continent. Instead, he naturally sensed the first prince's presence, or rather, it was Lin Dong Dong's presence. That presence was a mixture of Old Man Extermination's life and Su Ming's childhood playmate, Su Xianyi's son, Lei Chen's presence. The boy tugged at the corner of Su Ming's robe and asked softly, "Will we run into him?" "He will run into us." Su Ming lowered his head and stroked the boy's hair. As he mumbled to himself, he walked into the distance. When Su Ming reached the 14th winter on the 7th continent, he did not stop. Snow fell from the sky, but he continued walking forward. Gradually, the land turned white, and Su Ming saw the first mountain on the continent. It was a mountain that looked like a person's palm that pierced straight into the clouds. It was the dark mountain from Su Ming's memories. Perhaps the mountain had never existed, but had been created by someone to stand tall in the land. At the foot of the mountain, Su Ming saw a house, and there was a figure sitting cross-legged outside it. At first glance, that figure was the first prince, but when Su Ming looked at him again, he became Lei Chen. When Su Ming approached him, Lei Chen opened his eyes. "You're here." A smile appeared on Lei Chen's face. Su Ming stood there quietly. After a long while, a smile also appeared on his face, and he sat down beside Lei Chen. "Where are they?" Su Ming asked. "Once we came to this world, we split up. I don't know where they went." Lei Chen lifted his right hand and swung it. Immediately, a few pots of wine appeared between him and Su Ming. "It's been a long time since we drank together, right? I still remember when we stole the elder's wine when we were in Dark Mountain." It was at the foot of the mountain, Lei Chen said softly, and nostalgia appeared in his eyes. Su Ming fell silent. After some time, he picked up the pot of wine and placed it by his mouth, but he did not see any wine in the pot. It was empty, but Su Ming could clearly see the wine that flowed out of Lei Chen's mouth and fell on the snow. This scene caused a hint of sadness to appear on Su Ming's face, and he slowly put down the pot of wine. "Why aren't you drinking? Do you know that I waited 400 years for you to drink with me this time?" Lei Chen looked at Su Ming with a smile, and an ancient look gradually appeared on his face. "Why?" Su Ming asked softly while looking at Lei Chen. "I'm tired. I'm tired from the bottom of my heart. It's been so many years, and I'm really, really tired." Anguish appeared on Lei Chen's face. He picked up the pot of wine and took a big swig from it before he let out a deep breath. "The way I am right now is very good. I'm very satisfied. You, the elder, my father, the people of Dark Mountain, and my world are here." Lei Chen smiled, and his smile seemed to be filled with satisfaction. "My only regret is that it has been a long, long time since I drank with you. In our previous life, we were brothers. In this life, are you willing to drink with me until the end?" Lei Chen stared at Su Ming. Clarity appeared in his eyes as he waited for Su Ming's choice. Su Ming was silent, but the boy beside him became nervous. He tugged at the corner of Su Ming's robe, as if Su Ming's choice this time was incredibly crucial to him. "Big brother, don't make this choice." Hao stared at Su Ming. Almost at the moment he said those words, Su Ming had already picked up the pot of wine. With the pot of wine in hand, Su Ming slowly closed his eyes in silence. Time passed by without a single sound. Only the falling snow seemed to ignore the arrival and departure of time and continued falling on the ground. When Su Ming opened his eyes again, he stared at the snow in the world, at Dark Mountain, at Lei Chen, and vaguely he saw the familiar tribe beyond the house. Not too far away from the tribe was the elder, and he was staring at him. Bailing, Chun Xian, and the faces of the past were also staring at him. When Su Ming lowered his head, the pot of wine in his hand was no longer empty. There was wine in it, but the boy beside him was no longer around. As he stared at Lei Chen, Su Ming drank the wine in the pot in one gulp. A smile appeared on his face, and it seemed to have released his fatigue and the gloominess in his heart. He drank with Lei Chen, his first friend and brother in his life, at the foot of Dark Mountain and in the tribe. Time passed, and it was already night. Lei Chen and Su Ming's laughter echoed in the air as they drank pot after pot of wine. They talked about the past and talked about the beautiful moments in the past. "I still remember how you looked the first time you saw Bai Ling Haha. Speaking of which, if we hadn't gone to the market between the tribes that day, you might not have met her." Lei Chen put down the pot of wine with a smile. "I also remember the girl you liked at that time, but I never agreed with your taste. The smile on Su Ming's face was very beautiful. It was as pure and untainted as it was in the past. When Lei Chen heard this, he immediately smiled as well. When he shook his head, he seemed to be filled with a myriad of emotions. At that time, I was still young. When I saw how close you were with Bai Ling, I thought that I should have a close companion as well. I don't know why, but I thought that she was pretty good, but now that I think about it, I can't remember her name. Do you still have a recommendation tickets? Chapter 1591. Su Ming drank from day to night, and from night to day. Pot after pot, he drank in mouthfuls. When dawn arrived, the world was dark, and Lei Chun was drunk. He picked up his pot of wine and took a big swig from it. When he put it down, he closed his eyes. Su Ming quietly put down the pot of wine and looked at dark mountain tribe around him. He stared at the lights, but there was a layer of obscurity between him and the place. Su Ming knew that if he tore through that obscurity, he would be able to fuse into the place. However, he sighed softly. At the instant he put down the pot of wine in his hand, he closed his eyes. Lei Chun, we were brothers in our previous life. In this life, I will accompany you and finish drinking, Su Ming mumbled. When he opened his eyes again, Lei Chun was still in front of him, as if he was drunk. However, the tribe could no longer be seen. A thick layer of snow had accumulated on the ground, and dark mountain in the distance was faintly discernible. Hao Hao also appeared beside Su Ming. He tugged at the corner of Su Ming's robe and stared at him nervously. When he saw the clarity in Su Ming's eyes, he let out a sigh of relief. Su Ming stared at Lei Chun. When he lowered his head, the pot of wine was still empty. After a long while, Su Ming stood up. He did not speak. He picked up Hao Hao and walked into the distance while facing the snow and wind. This was Lei Chen's choice. He chose the same path as Di Tian. He chose to get lost. Di Tian wanted to resurrect the people around him and make them believe that this place was real, which was why he was willing to get lost. But Lei Chun, it was just as he said. He was tired and exhausted. He did not want to continue walking, and he did not want to continue walking because there was far too much anguish on his shoulders. Su Ming's sigh echoed in the snow and wind. The howls of the wind and snow seemed to turn into a ravine and a barrier that separated him from Lei Chun behind him. It was not just a barrier that separated two people, but two worlds. In that world, Su Ming had chosen to get lost for a short period of time to satisfy a drinking session with his brother in his previous life. After drinking, Su Ming chose to leave because he had his own path. Di Tian had not finished walking it, and Lei Chen did not continue, but Su Ming still had to walk it. As he left into the distance, the seemingly drunk Lei Chun lifted his head slowly in the snow and wind. He looked at Su Ming's gradually disappearing figure, and a melancholic look appeared on his face. We were brothers in our previous life in exchange for wine in this life. Su Ming, may you have a safe journey. When Lei Chen mumbled, laughter came from behind him. Lei Chen, didn't we agree to have a drink today? Come. I didn't win last time, but I don't believe I can't win this time. When Lei Chen turned his head around, he saw Su Ming standing beside him. There was a woman standing beside him, and that woman was Bai Ling. Lei Chen smiled. When he saw Su Ming leaving through the corner of his eyes, he saw that his voice had already disappeared into the snow. He was no longer there. What are you looking at? A woman's voice traveled into Lei Chen's ears. When he turned his head to the side and looked over, he saw the woman in his memories, the woman who had a strong body that suited the berserkers. He had forgotten her name, but when he looked at her now, she seemed to have become even more beautiful. I'm not looking at anything. I just think that there's a figure over there that looks incredibly similar to Su Ming. Come, let's drink. When Lei Chun spoke with a smile, Su Ming, who was beside him with Bai Ling, was momentarily stunned. He followed Lei Chen's gaze and looked beyond the snow, but he did not see anything. You can't see it because you are the you in my eyes, not the world in his eyes. Lei Chun shook his head. As he spoke, he picked up his pot of wine and took a big swig from it. The snow and wind became stronger, blurring the world, dark mountain tribe around Lei Chun, and all the people beside him. However, it was just as he had said, this was the world in his eyes. When the boy beside Su Ming turned his head around in the snow and wind, he could vaguely see Lei Chun standing alone in a desolate and lonely manner at the end of the snow and wind that filled his field of vision. Time gradually passed as Su Ming continued walking forward. Another 100 years went by, and Su Ming left the Black Land to head to the 8th continent. He walked through the endless sea of desert. On the 700th year, he was in the ancient city at the center of the 8th continent, and he remembered a promise. It was a promise the 3 9th-level Tao gods of ancient Zong had made to fight in the royal capital after 1,000 years of isolation. I can't see it anymore, Su Ming mumbled softly. He walked past the city, and to the west of the land he saw a tower. He also saw a person sitting cross-legged and meditating on top of the tower. The figure's face was unfamiliar. It was a corpse that no longer seemed to be rotting. The instant Su Ming looked over, the corpse's eyes flew open, and a brilliant light shone in them. I've been calculating for a total of 600 years, and I finally predicted that you would pass by this place on this day. Third Prince, you're the reason why I ended up in this state. You're the reason why I was sealed in this world. I've been waiting for you here for 100 years, you. Hurry up and die. The corpse said slowly. There was an indescribable resentment in his voice. As he spoke, the world around him let out a loud bang. The weather changed, and as the ground rose and fell, a large amount of fog filled the area. It distorted and rose into the sky to form a huge seal of fog above the corpse. It was not a seal, but a huge seal of a square. The runic symbols shone on it, and the bumps on it shone with a powerful dark light. The screen of light instantly enveloped the entire area, as if it had covered the sky. As his voice echoed in the air, it spread through the universe like thunder. Lin Dongdong. He was a great Tao paragon of one Tao sect, a powerful warrior who inherited the Tao of Kismet. In the once glorious world, it was just as Lei Chun had said. The first princes will have spread out to become Lei Chun, Lin Dongdong, and of course there was another person. Extermination. The strangeness of the world allowed them to split up. Lei Chun chose to get lost, and Su Ming had yet to meet extermination. As for Lin Dongdong, his choice was clearly to kill Su Ming in this place. If I kill you and snatch away your Kismet, I might be able to take another step forward in my level of cultivation. If I can become a 9th-level Tao god, I will have a way to leave this accursed place. Powerful killing intent appeared in Lin Dongdong's eyes. When he lifted his right hand, he pointed at Su Ming. Immediately, the sky roared, and the gigantic fog seal started spinning. In an instant, it appeared above Su Ming and pressed down on him with loud booming sounds. With it, the ground under Su Ming's feet trembled violently. Cracks instantly appeared, and it looked as if the ground had sunk in. Signs of collapse started showing. Su Ming's expression remained the same. During the 700 years, he had not paid attention to his level of cultivation, but at that moment, when he looked at the seal of fog descending from the sky, he did not sense too much mighty pressure. It was as if he could make it disappear with just a wave of his hand. Su Ming also did not feel too threatened by Lin Dongdong. This was something Su Ming had also noticed once he focused his attention on Lin Dongdong. Lin Dongdong was already weak, and his level of cultivation was already at the edge of great Tao paragons. It was as if his existence in the world was not tolerated. While he was weakened, Su Ming gradually became stronger. He did not speak, but instead lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky. With it, the gigantic fog seal immediately let out a shocking boom and stopped abruptly 1,000 feet above Su Ming. It was as if there was a barrier that could not be seen beneath the fog seal, and that barrier made it difficult for the fog seal to break through. All truths and falsehoods, all glory and destruction, only the words of later generations exist, and they only exist in the passage of time. Do you understand now? Su Ming asked softly. He swung his right hand, and the huge seal of fog immediately started trembling. As it did so, it gradually became indistinct, and in just the span of a few breaths, it disappeared without a trace, Su Ming's calmness immediately caused Lin Dongdong's expression to change while he was on the tower. His pupils shrank, and he focused his attention on Su Ming, but he discovered to his shock that he could not see through his level of cultivation. This is impossible. With my level of cultivation, it's impossible for me to not see through this person's level of cultivation. When Lin Dongdong's pupils shrank, he swiftly stood up from the tower and took a step toward Su Ming. Once his foot landed, he left behind an afterimage. When he appeared in front of Su Ming, he seized the air with his right hand. With it, the sky roared, and as the weather changed, a crimson sun appeared. The ground roared, and with Su Ming as its center, the cracks on the ground connected together to form the picture of a moon. Sun and moon shine together, aurora in the world. Lin Dongdong's voice echoed in the air like thunder. Immediately, an indescribable wave of heat erupted from the crimson sun in the sky. It was as if the entire sun was falling from the sky, and it charged towards Su Ming with loud, booming sounds. At the same time, the mark of the moon under Su Ming's feet rotated swiftly. As it did so, it looked as if the ground was moving. Waves of silver light instantly rose into the sky and enveloped Su Ming within them. Gather the threads of kismet in the universe. Gather the power of all lives. And when your kismet dies, descend upon Dao Forest. Lin Dongdong's eyes were bloodshot. At the instant he said his final word, the sun in the sky descended with a bang, and the silver light on the ground turned into countless silver threads of law that instantly charged towards Su Ming to kill him. Each of the silver threads contained Lin Dongdong's kismet. He used his kismet to turn it into a will that could kill the world and make the world fall. He gathered his fate as one of all lives, and it was as if one Dao sect Dao of kismet had descended. You, still not dead. Lin Dongdong was incredibly confident in his attack. Even though he had become much weaker, it was his strongest killing move. He was confident that unless his opponent possessed the power of a great Dao paragon, he would definitely die. Su Ming sighed softly while he stood under the setting sun made of silver threads. Do you still not understand? Chapter 1592. Su Ming's sigh was still echoing in the air. He lifted his right hand, and just like how he had scattered the fog seal, he swung it lightly. Without a single sound, the silver threads around Su Ming instantly stopped moving. Then, they instantly became indistinct, and in the blink of an eye, they disappeared around Su Ming. It was as if they had never existed to begin with. At that moment, they returned to nothing. Even the sun that had fallen from the sky gradually became transparent. Once it became the color of the sky, it disappeared above Su Ming. This scene immediately caused Lin Dongdong's pupils to shrink. He took a few steps back without any hesitation, and with a look of disbelief on his face, he stared at Su Ming. In fact, at that instant, his breathing quickened slightly. You? Lin Dongdong opened his mouth, but he did not know what to say. At that moment, the shock in his heart could not be described with words. He had never expected that someone would be able to so easily scatter his killing move, as if his divine ability truly did not exist. This scene overturned his mind, and as a great Dao paragon, Lin Dongdong was unable to accept it. We haven't met for 700 years, and your level of cultivation has indeed surpassed my expectations, but my desire to kill you today will not decrease in the slightest. Lin Dongdong sucked in a deep breath. A brilliant light shone in his eyes, and powerful killing intent appeared in them. He took a swift step forward and lifted his right hand. Immediately, a black short sword appeared in his hand. It was covered in a large number of runic symbols. With a single swing, it turned into 10 swords. With another swing, they turned into white swords, then 1,000 swords. When they eventually filled the sky and earth, they turned into an endless number of swords that replaced the space in the world, turning the area into a world of swords. The countless sword lights charged forward with a howl and charged at Su Ming. It's useless. There is time between us. Have you not understood it yet? Su Ming shook his head. A clear look appeared in his eyes, and as he sighed, The sword light instantly pierced through his body, but Su Ming's body seemed to be an illusion. The sword light passed through him, but did not cause even a single bit of damage. This world is fake. Ancient Zong is just a possession between me and Xianzong. This is just an illusion. I didn't get lost in it, and you were just a speck of dust. Su Ming shook his head and walked forward. With every single step he took, Lin Dongdong would take a step back with an incredibly sour expression. 5 steps later, just as he was about to speak, Su Ming's words traveled into his ears, causing his expression to change once again. He thought that Su Ming's words had pointed out Lin Dongdong's hesitation. You can't see through my level of cultivation. It's not because my level of cultivation is profound, but because there is time between us. It's a barrier you can't see through, Su Ming said flatly and walked in front of Lin Dongdong. I don't believe it. A ferocious expression instantly appeared on Lin Dongdong's face. He lifted his right hand and struck his chest. With it, his face instantly turned purplish red, and a large amount of black smoke gushed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth with a bang. It gathered together to form a huge face in midair. It was ferocious at that moment, and when it roared at Su Ming, the world immediately changed. It was as if the laws in the world had also changed at that instant. At the same time, the gigantic face opened its mouth and sucked in a sharp breath in Su Ming's direction. With it, the power of the world in the area charged towards the face with loud booming sounds. Only Su Ming did not move his long hair, and neither did his robes flutter. He stood calmly and looked at Lin Dongdong calmly. At the instant Lin Dongdong saw this, shock appeared on his face. His divine ability could absorb all the aura in the world, but at that moment, it could not affect Su Ming in the slightest. However, he still did not believe in Su Ming's words, or rather, he did not dare to believe them. He did not want to believe them. At that moment, he had changed from wanting to kill Su Ming to wanting to prove that Su Ming's words were nonsense. At that moment, the huge face closed its eyes and returned to its body underneath. Lin Dongdong's level of cultivation seemed to have increased by a large margin. Killing intent shone in his eyes, and he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind Su Ming. He threw a punch at him, but there was no booming sound. Instead, it shot straight through Su Ming's body. This is impossible. Lin Dongdong's eyes were bloodshot. He continuously appeared around Su Ming and threw punch after punch at him. This process lasted for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, and Lin Dongdong took a few steps back with a pale face. He stared at Su Ming blankly, and despair appeared in his eyes. Even when he was trapped in the once glorious world, he did not despair. Instead, he persisted in killing Su Ming and snatching his kismet, because he had his pride. He was a great Dao paragon. Yet now, when Su Ming finally appeared, he fell into despair. Not only could he not kill him, he could not even touch Su Ming's body. Su Ming's words also seemed to echo in Lin Dongdong's ears at that moment, causing his despair to be tinged with sorrow. This is impossible. He could only mumble and tell himself that all of this was not real. But after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, there seemed to be no other explanation besides this. This is some sort of divine ability you learned in this accursed world. Right now, the one who appears before me is not your real body, but an invisible shadow of yours. Lin Dongdong lifted his head swiftly and glared at Su Ming. When his voice echoed in the air like thunder, Su Ming could not turn around and looked at Lin Dongdong. This is the answer. This is why I can't kill you. It's not because we are separated by time, and it's not because I'm fake, but because the one who appears before me is just a shadow. I know now. You are a cultivator of Seven Moons Sect, and Seven Moons Sect practices the Seven Lives shadow art. You must have reached some sort of realm in this art, which is why you could create a shadow that cannot be killed, but at the same time, this shadow of yours cannot be killed, and it is difficult for you to even affect a mortal. The more Lin Dongdong spoke, the more certain he became. When he finished speaking, there was no longer despair in his eyes. Instead, a cold, fierce killing intent appeared in them again. Third Prince, what a man. Your words just now have indeed caused me to be a loss for a moment. I will find your real body and kill you." Lin Dong Dong stared at Su Ming and moved back slowly. Then, he turned around and swung his arm, intending to leave. Su Ming stared at Lin Dong Dong. With a calm expression, he lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky. Immediately, the entire sky trembled with a bang, and stars appeared. The number of stars could not be seen clearly at first glance. The only thing that could be seen was that they were arranged together, as if they had turned into a gigantic whip. The Starlight Whip. I finally understand why the power that appears before me is always an illusory projection and not its true body. When Su Ming spoke softly, he swung his right hand. Immediately, the stars in the sky shone with a powerful starlight. That starlight instantly replaced the sky and all the light on the ground, causing the world to become piercing to the eyes. That piercing light was the same as black, and since the light had reached its peak, anyone who looked at it would only be able to see darkness. When the light disappeared, Su Ming's body had already disappeared. He had left with a boy called Hao Hao. Only Lin Dong Dong's stunned body was left behind. At that moment, his body was slowly shattering. When it completely shattered, Lin Dong Dong's nascent divinity floated in the air and stared at the area in a daze. Su Ming did not kill him, because at that moment, Lin Dong Dong's life was far more painful than death. After a long while, Lin Dong Dong's nascent divinity suddenly laughed loudly. As his laughter echoed in the air, it exuded great confidence. "Third Prince, what an art! What a divine ability, but don't even think about deceiving my eyes with it. Even if your shadow has a certain level of cultivation, as long as I find your real body, I will definitely be able to kill you. Third Prince, hide well, because once I find your real body and soul will be destroyed. I will definitely be able to find your real body." Lin Dong Dong's face was filled with confidence. In fact, he felt as if he had gained an epiphany that he had not had for a long time after he became a great Tao paragon. He let out a cold harumph. With his confidence and epiphany, his nascent divinity left into the distance. He would use the rest of his life and all his cultivation base to search for Su Ming's real body in what would be an endless amount of years to come. He was destined not to be able to find it. He was just like a fish searching for its own tears in the sea. But he was still persistent and remained as mad as ever, because he believed, perhaps due to the power of his belief, one day he would be able to find the Su Ming in his heart. However, that Su Ming might not be Su Ming. Di Tian asked for his thoughts, Lei Chun asked for peace, and Lin Dong Dong asked for madness. What do I ask for? Su Ming walked into the distance with the boy in his arms. When he mumbled under his breath, he walked further into the distance. Everyone in the world that they believed to be real was chasing after dreams that they might have had in the past and might still have in the present. Their dreams might come true, or they might still be on their way. However, this pursuit was a form of power. Even if it was impossible, it was enough to deceive oneself and numb oneself, because seeking was a method, and it was bound to be filled with twists and turns and desolation. Some people stopped on their way and wanted to rest, but that rest might be the end of their journey, just like the butterfly called Harmonious Morris alba. Some people gave up on moving forward and drew the mark of the end on their path. They lived in that mark, and only they themselves knew whether they were happy or unhappy. Some people continued walking down their path in twists and turns and desolation. Asking is a way, recommendation votes is a kind of attitude. Asking for recommendation votes. Chapter 1593. Perhaps when I return to ancient Zong one day and see Master under the city gate, he will tell me the answer. Su Ming mumbled softly. He remembered his promise with Tian Xiezi. When we meet again under the city gate, I will answer your final question. Su Ming closed his eyes, and Tian Xiezi's words echoed in his ears. They accompanied him as he continued walking. 100 years passed, then 200 years. When they walked through the 9th continent, Su Ming saw the desert that was originally an ocean. The desert was vast, and there was no end to it. It was just like the path under his feet. As long as he walked on it, he would stubbornly walk until the end. Even if he did not know where the end was, even if he did not know the direction of his future, even if his heart was filled with anxiety and fear since he had chosen this path, he would not turn back. As Su Ming stared at the boundless desert, the boy beside him tugged at the corner of his robe and spoke softly. "We're almost there. It's at the center of the ocean. That's my home." Hao Hao's voice was still young. After 900 years of companionship, Su Ming and Hao Hao walked through the once glorious world. They saw shattered mountains, dried-up rivers, corpses, and wreckage. At that moment, Su Ming saw a desert, but perhaps in Hao Hao's eyes, he saw an ocean. Su Ming lowered his head and cast a glance at Hao Hao. In silence, he did not speak. Instead, he brought Hao Hao into the desert and walked further into the distance. There was wind in the desert. It moaned and echoed in the air, as if it was sighing desolately. It drifted in the area and swept up sand to cover the entire area. It also hid away the former vastness of the place. However, the sandstorm that filled the sky seemed to be very similar to an ocean. If time insisted on it, then the sandstorm would turn into an ocean. That would be the only choice. Su Ming held Hao Hao's hand in the sandstorm. He walked forward until an ancient ship appeared in the sandstorm that resembled an ocean in front of him. It sailed through the sandstorm, and the figure meditating on the ship became blurry when Su Ming looked at it. "I should be able to see him here," Su Ming said softly as he watched the ship leave into the distance in the sandstorm. "Who is it?" Hao Hao lifted his head and looked at Su Ming. "An old friend." Su Ming smiled faintly. He patted Hao Hao's head and continued, leading him deeper into the sandstorm. "What happened to him?" Hao Hao asked again. "He's lost." Su Ming shook his head. His gaze landed on the indistinct figure of the ship leaving into the distance. When he averted his gaze, he continued walking with Hao Hao. Time passed by. Once every few months, Su Ming would see the ancient ship wandering about in the sea of wind and sand, as if it had lost its way and was continuously searching for the way it had lost. It was the feeling of trying to continue walking on the road, but he couldn't find it. "He's very pitiful," Hao Hao said softly. "Why?" "That's because he didn't want to get lost. If he did, he would still be able to have his own happiness. However, his heart is unwilling. It's just that he got lost on this road and can't return." Hao Hao thought for a moment and said, "However, he's so stupid. He actually got lost." Hao Hao laughed. His laughter was extremely clear and melodious, like a drop of water knocking on a limestone floor. Su Ming smiled as well. He stared at the ship swimming past in the distance again, and there was a sentimental and soft sigh in his smile. Old Man Extermination had lost his way. He had been walking on his path his entire life, and with his dreams, he walked forward step by step. There was no right or wrong in the entanglement between him and Su Ming. There was only one thing. "I can walk on this path, but you cannot walk in front of me." This was Su Ming's sentimental thought, and he sighed softly because he did not know whether he would become like Old Man Extermination one day and lose his way while persevering. After all, once he lost his way, he would be lost for his entire life. Perhaps there was another choice in silence. Su Ming crouched down and looked at Hao Hao. There should be another choice. "Hao Hao, wait for me here," Su Ming said softly. Hao Hao stared at him and nodded. "What other choice? Are you going to show him the way?" "Others can't show others the way they walk." Su Ming shook his head. When he turned around, he walked towards the spot where the ship had disappeared. His figure gradually disappeared into the wind and sand until he could no longer be seen. The ship moved forward in the sea of sand against the wind and sand. Old Man Extermination was dressed in the long robe from Su Ming's memories. He sat quietly on the ship, as if he had never changed. It did not matter whether it was Harmonious Morris Alba's Expanse world or this place. When Su Ming appeared on the lone ship, Old Man Extermination's eyes flew open and determination appeared in them. When he looked at Su Ming, there was not a hint of surprise on his face. It was as if he had known a long time ago that there would come a day when he would see Su Ming in this place. My path is wrong, Su Ming said calmly. Old Man Extermination was silent for a moment before he asked faintly, "What is wrong?" Su Ming smiled and did not continue speaking. To me, my path is not wrong. The one who is wrong is the person, and my mistake is that I lost to you in harmonious Morris Alba's expanse cosmos. Old Man Extermination's voice was calm. When he spoke languidly, it stirred up ripples in his memories. That was my first mistake. My second was my second loss in ancient Zhang's expanse cosmos. Old Man Extermination's expression remained the same, but a hint of regret appeared in his eyes. I didn't win. Then why did you say that my path is wrong? A brilliant light shone in Old Man Extermination's eyes. Is your path definitely the right one? You see that my path is wrong. How can I not see that your path has already taken the wrong path? Who is right and who is wrong? Whether it is you or me, neither of us has the right to say. Let's see the results. We chose the same path on this path. You want to resurrect all the familiar faces and do whatever it takes, but I want to reach boundless Tao realm and make time flow backwards. I want to return to the past before Xianzong came. At that time, I will kill Xianzong and do whatever it takes, even if I have to lose everything. Killing intent filled Old Man Extermination's eyes as he stared at Su Ming coldly. Su Ming was silent for a long time. After a long while, he said slowly, "If you continue down your path, in the end, you will be the only one in the universe." Old Man Extermination was silent for an even longer time. A complicated look gradually appeared on his face, and when he looked at Su Ming, it became even stronger. Then what about your path? If you continue down it, in the end, you will be the only one who will disappear from the universe. Su Ming was silent, and Old Man Extermination also chose to be silent. One of them stood, and the other meditated. The ship did not stop moving forward. It did not matter whether the path ahead of it was wrong or right. It was still moving, and it would never stop. Then, this would be the third battle between us. After a long while, a smile appeared on Su Ming's face, and he looked at Old Man Extermination. This should be what you wanted to say when you chose to come to me, right? Old Man Extermination's eyes shone brilliantly when he spoke slowly. You've been waiting for me here for a long time. Didn't you also wait for me to say these words? Su Ming smiled faintly. That's right. The brilliant light in Old Man Extermination's eyes turned into fighting spirit. That fighting spirit did not come from attacking with a divine ability or using an art to kill Su Ming. Instead, it was a final battle between two people who did not agree with each other's Taos. If you lose, you can bury my Tao in your world, because the universe where I am can no longer see your existence. Old Man Extermination enunciated each word clearly, and his voice was firm. If I win, you will owe me a promise. When Su Ming spoke calmly, he did not have the raging fighting spirit that Old Man Extermination had. There was not a hint of anger in his voice, and he did not look at Old Man Extermination either. Instead, he turned around and walked towards the vast universe beyond the ship. Gradually, his figure disappeared into the sandstorm. Old Man Extermination stared at Su Ming leaving into the distance. His eyes sparkled, and he mumbled under his breath. There's no right or wrong in this, but you insist on doing this. The third battle, huh? I can't accept losing twice. This is even better. After a long while, Old Man Extermination gradually closed his eyes and immersed himself in meditation once more. He sat on his lone ship and left into the distance. Su Ming walked forward quietly in the sandstorm. He did not turn his head back. Only a strange and enchanting look shone in his eyes, but only lasted for a moment before disappearing. In the ocean of sandstorm, Su Ming arrived beside Hao Hao, who was waiting for him. When Hao Hao saw Su Ming, a youthful smile appeared on his face. Hao Hao remembered that what you said previously was wrong. He didn't get lost. Why? Because there is no path to begin with. The path is under your feet, and the place you walk to is the path. It doesn't matter whether it's the end or the middle of the path. If you're obsessed with whether the path is right or wrong, then you'll be walking down the wrong path. Am I right? Hao tugged at the corner of Su Ming's robe and said with a smile. There was a slightly smug look on his face, as if he was very happy that he had understood the logic that even Su Ming did not. Su Ming smiled and patted Hao Hao's head again. There was a gentle look on his face when he nodded. You're right. There is no path in the world for everyone, and there is naturally no right or wrong path. We shouldn't care about these things, or else there will truly be a right or wrong path, Su Ming said with a smile and walked into the distance with Hao Hao. They gradually left into the distance in the sandstorm. Their voices were rather indistinct, but they could still be heard faintly. Then why did you say that he walked down the wrong path? Because I wanted him to walk down the wrong path. Oh, you left just now to tell him that he walked down the wrong path. There is no right or wrong path, but since I said it, there will be a right or wrong path. This is the other choice. He will continue walking down the wrong path until he owes me a promise. Their figures gradually disappeared in the sandstorm. Even their voices could not be heard clearly, and they were slowly drowned out by the wind. Some people leave behind recommendation votes every single day. Some people occasionally think of others on the path and leave behind recommendation votes. Some people never give recommendation votes. My fellow Taoists, leave behind your recommendation votes. Chapter 1594. The wind howled, and when it landed in their ears, it turned into moans. It was like a sun, and it echoed in the air with a desolate air. It seemed to have turned into some sort of soft hymn in the sea of wind and sand. After nearly 1,000 years, Su Ming brought Hao Hao to the once glorious world. He walked at the bottom of the sea, which had been there for a long time, and walked in the desert that had been there for a long time. They walked towards the center of the world. His footsteps were not quick. They walked for a long, long time, until Su Ming forgot about time. One day, a world surrounded by wind and sand appeared in front of him and Hao Hao. It was an oasis. It was incredibly eye-catching in the wind and sand, causing all those who saw it to feel their spirits lift. This was the first time Su Ming saw green in the world. There was a lake in the oasis. The fragrance of grass around the lake seemed to be a barrier to the people. They could see it, but they could not touch it. We're home. Hao Hao held Su Ming's hand. When he spoke softly, the two of them had already moved through the wind and sand and entered the oasis. The fragrance of grass filled the air, causing people to cherish the only color in the colorless world. Su Ming stood quietly in the oasis, and his gaze landed on the lake. Is this your final choice? Su Ming closed his eyes. When he opened them after a long while, he looked at the boy beside him. The boy nodded seriously. There was not a hint of hesitation in his voice. This is Hao Hao's home. Hao Hao wants to stay here. I want to change everything here, Hao Hao said softly. Even though his voice was soft, it revealed a sense of determination and stubbornness. Big brother, can you stay with me for a few more years? I am afraid of being alone. The boy held Su Ming's hand and stared at him. The clarity in his eyes made it clear that he was relying on him, as if he was waiting for Su Ming's answer. Su Ming lifted his right hand and patted Hao Hao's head. After a long while, he said softly, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I won't leave anytime soon." The boy smiled. He smiled happily and contentedly. He cast Su Ming a deep glance, then slowly let go of his hand. He walked towards the lake, and with each step he took, he would turn his head around. When the water reached his knees, he turned his head around and stared at Su Ming. "Big brother, thank you for helping me. Thank you for sending me back here. I said before that if you help me, I will help you. In the future, I will help you gain an epiphany about my world." The boy smiled happily and gradually walked into the lake. When his figure was completely submerged by the lake, the entire lake immediately rumbled, and a vortex appeared at the spot where Hao Hao had disappeared. The vortex spun outwards rapidly and revealed Hao Hao, who was sitting cross-legged at the bottom of the lake with his eyes closed. Right before Su Ming's eyes, branches grew swiftly from the bottom of the lake around Hao Hao. In an instant, they surrounded Hao Hao's body and covered him completely, as if they had turned into a seed. It was the seed of the tree of Tao verification. At that moment, an indescribably exuberant life force erupted from the seed's former homeland. It could only cover the oasis at that moment, but Su Ming could imagine that as the tree of Tao verification grew, there would come a day when that life force would spread through the entire world and the 9 continents. It would turn the desert into an ocean, and the mountains and rivers of the 9 continents would reappear in the world. The monotonous colors would become dazzling, and the world would return to its former glory. At that time, perhaps with the exuberant life force, life would appear in the world, and cultivators would appear. Because at the end of the day, the world had become a wasteland, not because its strongest warrior had died, and neither was it because all the lives had returned to dust, but because the emperor of ancient Zong had taken away the tree of Tao verification, which allowed the world to continue growing. It had become a tree without roots, and now, as Hao Hao returned, as he made his choice, and as the tree of Tao verification reappeared, all of this would completely change. This was Hao Hao's choice. Su Ming quietly watched the whirlpool in the lake gradually calm down. The lake water slowly covered the seed of the tree of Tao verification that had formed at the bottom of the lake. In silence, he sighed softly. He respected the boy's choice and understood his wish. He did not want his homeland to remain like this. He hoped that with his return, he could change everything. Perhaps many years later, when the tree of Tao verification reached the sky, the boy would sit on the crown of the tree and stare at his homeland and the world. A truly happy smile would appear on his face. Su Ming closed his eyes and sat down by the lake. He had promised Hao Hao that he would accompany him for a few more years, which was why his solitary meditation was like the lines on his palm. With each stroke, 1 year passed, and in the blink of an eye, 100 years passed. During them, Su Ming did not open his eyes. He just continued sitting there. In fact, he did not even train. Instead, he immersed himself in an ethereal state. He was not thinking, and neither was he trying to gain an epiphany. Instead, he felt as if he was connected to the seed Hao Hao had formed, and he sensed some sort of growth behind him. The lake had also changed over the past 100 years. A small tree had appeared at the center of the lake. The small tree stood tall in the lake, but its roots had spread to every corner of the lake, spreading to the ground. 100 years later, when Su Ming opened his eyes for the first time, he looked at the small tree at the center of the lake, and it was as if he had seen Hao Hao. In silence, Su Ming did not stand up. He continued sitting there and closed his eyes again. While he was immersed in the ethereal state, Su Ming's cultivation base did not rise or fall. However, at some unknown point of time, his Tao Paragon and his third, I had formed a complete set of 7 overlapping Tao Paragons. The 7 overlapping Tao Paragons had caused Su Ming to ignore his cultivation base. But it was precisely because of this neglect that his 7 overlapping Tao Paragons gained more corporeal form. Then, the shadow of an 8th overlapping Tao Paragon appeared beside the 7 overlapping Tao Paragons. It might just be an illusion, but once it gained corporeal form, it would mean that Su Ming's cultivation base would increase by leaps and bounds, and he would become a great Tao Paragon. There were less than 30 great Tao Paragons in all of ancient Zong, and there was an indescribable ravine between great Tao Paragons and the 9th level Tao gods. It was incredibly deep, so deep that even great Tao Paragons would find it difficult to cross it, or else it would have been impossible for there to only be 3 9th level Tao gods over the course of countless years. Su Ming did not bother about his cultivation base. He only sat there and remained in an ethereal state to sense Hao Hao's growth. He sensed the changes in the world as he grew, and he simply allowed time to pass. Another 100 years went by. His face did not seem to have changed much, but in truth, there was an ancient air about him. His black robes spilled over his shoulders, and his purple hair fell on his shoulders. Su Ming lowered his head and meditated quietly. The small tree in the lake behind him had already started growing. It was a tree that was 1,000 feet tall, and its trunk occupied half of the lake. It might not be tall enough to reach the sky, but its astonishing presence could still be seen. The oasis was still the same, but outside the oasis, the central sea was now a world of wind and sand. At this moment, the wind and sand gradually lessened. Traces of moisture seemed to exist between the heavens and the earth, causing the desert in this place to slowly become greener. Perhaps it would not be long before the desert here would disappear, and the central sea of the past would return. Another 100 years went by. From the moment Su Ming woke up and brought Hao to the continents in the world, a total of 1,200 years had passed. The tree of Tao verification behind him had already covered the entire lake and grown to a height of nearly 10,000 feet. This height caused the ancient tree of Tao verification to begin showing its extraordinary might. Even from the distance, Su Ming could vaguely see the towering will of the book of Tao verification. At the same time, the wind and sand in the desert completely disappeared. A faint layer of blue seawater seemed to fill the place. The exuberant life force caused the desert, which had been covered by seawater, to light up for the first time in countless years. When the 300th year of the second 1,000 years arrived, Su Ming was still sitting in the lake. However, the area around him was already filled with seawater. The desert had turned into an ocean. It was the former Central Sea. It was a vast ocean that completely covered the entire basin of the desert. And it was a tree that was 100,000 feet tall. It stood erect on the ocean, and it looked as if it was reaching the heavens. The roots of the tree had already covered the entire oasis. Only the roots moved around Su Ming on their own to reveal an exit that led to the outside. The seawater in the exit seemed to be very gentle, as if it was affected by some powerful will and did not want to disturb Su Ming while he closed his eyes. As time passed, the amount of seawater increased. When it completely covered the desert between the 9 continents and turned into a true ocean, half of the second 1,000 years had passed. Su Ming opened his eyes for the second time. He stared at the seawater around him, at the oasis that was once there, and at the towering roots. A smile appeared at the corners of his lips. Su Ming knew that Hao had succeeded. Perhaps it would not take long for the world to regain its colors, and it would return to its former glory. He could sense a success. Due to his connection with the tree of Tao verification, Su Ming felt as if he had personally experienced it and witnessed everything. At that time, when I stand in the sky, I should be able to see the ancient tree of Tao verification that wants to be as tall as the sky in the seawater. Perhaps even the sky will have to lower its head before it, because the ancient tree of Tao verification will have already become the world. Su Ming mumbled softly and gradually closed his eyes again. At that time, it will be time for me to leave. The promise made 3,000 years ago outside ancient Zhang city gate will also be fulfilled. The fight for possession will also come to an end, but I am not certain whether the path I will take when I open my eyes will belong to me or to him. Su Ming's calm voice echoed in his heart. Monday, Mo forgets recommendation ticket. Chapter 1595. In his ethereal state, Su Ming did not think about any complicated questions. In fact, he did not even think about the world of ancient Zong. Instead, in this state, he quietly allowed time to pass while his mind was still in a state of peace. If he had to say that he was thinking, then perhaps he was thinking about what sort of path he wanted to pursue. With that thought in mind, he immersed himself in the ethereal state, the growth of the tree of Tao verification, and the changes in the world. This sort of feeling was something that no cultivator had ever experienced since ancient times. Be it in ancient Zong or the world in the past, there had never been a cultivator who could sense the changes in the world like Su Ming did. He had fused with the tree of Tao verification's will and personally experienced everything. The tree of Tao verification was born to verify Tao, and at that moment, Su Ming had also verified his Tao. Time passed. Spring and autumn passed year by year. When the world seawater regained its former glory, the tree of Tao verification grew from a height of 10,000 feet to 1,000,000 feet. Its trunk occupied a small part of the ocean, and it stood at the center. However, as the crown of the tree spread, it gradually covered the entire sea, causing the tree to reach the sky. The 9 continents surrounding the seawater gradually gained some green life force. It filled the air, and the mountain ranges on the 9 continents gradually became complete. Gradually, rivers appeared, and more life appeared. Su Ming personally experienced all of this. It was just as Hao Hao had said, "If you help me, I will help you." Over the years, Hao Hao had used his actions to explain his words. To Su Ming, this sort of serendipity had already surpassed the limits of what a cultivator could obtain. The preciousness and rarity of this sort of feeling was something that no one had ever experienced in the past, and Su Ming was certain that in the future, it would be difficult for anyone to obtain this sort of serendipity. He saw the changes in the world and the tree of Tao verification grow from a seed to reach the sky and cover the entire world. This sort of experience was the greatest serendipity Su Ming had ever received in his life. As Su Ming sensed it, he gradually gained an epiphany. When that epiphany became clearer, another 100 years passed. Su Ming had been in the world for 1,700 years. In his ethereal state, the 8th overlapping Tao paragon in his 3rd eye gradually became clear from its indistinct state. It began to gather together and take form. As it took form, the power of cultivation base Hao Hao had given Su Ming slowly fused with his body. In truth, Su Ming's level of cultivation had risen to his current realm because of the Phala, but more so because of what Hao Hao had done in the past. It was all the life force in the tree of Tao verification. The strength of that power was enough to change Su Ming's level of cultivation, and when he witnessed the tree continuously growing from a seed to its current state, the epiphany caused Su Ming's level of cultivation to go through a metamorphosis. After 1,000-something years of fusion, the 8th overlapping Tao paragon turned into Su Ming. Su Ming did not open his eyes, but the 8th overlapping Tao paragon in his 3rd eye had already reached its peak. With just one more fusion, Su Ming's level of cultivation would break through Tao immortal realm, and he would step into the ranks of great Tao paragons. However, this fusion was no simple task. If any mishap were to occur, then everything would be for naught. Su Ming did not pay any attention to it, and neither did he care about it. He just continued meditating quietly. The world and the world outside changed every year. As the mountains and rivers recovered, and as green filled the 9 continents. During the 100 years after Su Ming's second 1,000 years in the world passed, the 9 continents returned to their former glory. When Su Ming looked over, he found that the ground was filled with spiritual aura, and the seawater was filled with life. Besides the lack of life in the world, it was completely different from before. The roots of the tree of Tao verification had already filled half of the ocean. The area of the tree crown had long since surpassed the ocean and covered a small portion of the 9 continents. It was nearly 1 million feet tall. When Su Ming looked over, he could not see the sky. He could only see the endless tree of Tao verification. Su Ming sat in the depths of the tree of Tao verification's roots, but there was always a path before him that stretched into the distant world. From a distance, that path looked like a crack. It was a path left for Su Ming by the tree of Tao verification. When 300 years of the 3rd 1,000 years passed, the sky and the world outside could no longer be seen. The only thing that could be seen was the sky replaced by the tree of Tao verification's tree crown. The sky was no longer blue, but green. The green sky was the color that belonged to the world. The area of the tree's crown was no longer just a small part of the 9 continents. Instead, it had completely covered the entire area of the 9 continents with the central sea at its center over the past 1,000 years. It had spread to the ends of the world. The 9 continents and the world seemed to be protected, and they existed under the tree of Tao verification's tree crown. This scene allowed Su Ming to gain even more epiphanies. A vast presence appeared faintly on his body as he meditated. When that presence spread out, Su Ming gradually opened his eyes. However, there was an empty look in his eyes, as if when he opened them, He did not see the area around him, but the world outside. When he closed his eyes once again, the epiphany remained in his heart. This was the world that had shocked the emperor of ancient Zhang's heart the first time he stepped into this place after he reached boundless Tao realm and tore through space. It was also the reason why he valued the tree of Tao verification so much. It was a guardian tree that could protect a world, starting from the 300 years of the third 1,000 years, when the tree of Tao verification completely replaced the sky and protected the 9 continents. Life gradually appeared. Those lives gradually multiplied. Trees appeared, and eventually living beings appeared. All of it was like a cycle of a world. Su Ming saw it from the beginning to the end, and 700 years went by during the third 1,000 years. From the moment Su Ming stepped into the world until then, 2,700 years had passed. To a mortal, this period of time might be equivalent to several kingdoms being replaced or hundreds of years going through dozens of cycles of life and death. But even cultivators could sense how ancient it was. At that moment, Su Ming opened his eyes. After remaining silent for a long time, he slowly stood up. This was the first time he did not meditate in the 2,000 years he had been in this place. Instead, when he stood up, he walked forward. Step by step, he walked down the path left behind by the tree of Tao verification. When he walked forward, the tree behind him gradually closed up, causing the path to disappear. When Su Ming walked out of the roots of the tree of Tao verification and the seawater to the sky, he stood in midair. When he cast his gaze over the area, he saw that the green sky was the tree crown and the blue beneath him was the sea. The 9 continents around him were filled with an exuberant life force. The world had already been completely changed. The glory of the past had returned to its foundation, but whether it could bloom into brilliant flowers would depend on the living beings who were born in this place to personally create them in the future. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. When he swept his gaze past the land, his third eye at the center of his brow opened to reveal Su Ming's 8th overlapping Great Tao Paragon. It was white light that filled Su Ming's third eye, causing others to be unable to see the Great Tao Paragon contained in it. They could only see an endless amount of white. When he swept his gaze past the land, Su Ming saw Di Tian's city and the few figures around him. At that moment, the smile on Di Tian's face was one that Su Ming had never seen before. After staring at it for a long time, Su Ming averted his gaze and saw Lei, Chun, Dark Mountain, and the tribe at the foot of Dark Mountain. They were filled with cheers and laughter, and they were filled with happiness. Be it Di Tian or Lei Chun, they chose this place and chose to be lost, but no matter what, since they were lost, they were naturally affected by the changes in the world. However, they could not see the effects themselves. It was just like how Lin Dong Dong, who was on the 6th continent with bloodshot eyes and messy hair, was still searching for Su Ming's real body in his world. He believed that as long as he killed Su Ming's real body, he could snatch away his kismet and return to ancient Zong. After a long while, Su Ming closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked at the tree of Tao verification. It had given him a great amount of power and a serendipity that allowed him to see the world change. This serendipity caused Su Ming to wrap his fist in his palm and bow deeply towards the tree of Tao verification. With it, the tree of Tao verification let out a loud rumble. As it trembled, a gap appeared in the green sky above the tree crown. The gap spread out, allowing sunlight from the world outside to spill in and bathe the area around Su Ming. When Su Ming lifted his head, he stared at the gap in the green sky. He knew that Hao Hao had opened a path for him to return to ancient Zong. In silence, Su Ming cast a glance at the area around him again and engraved everything in his heart. He turned into a long arc and charged towards the gap in the sky. Once he shot through it, he saw a huge vortex in the sky beyond the tree crown. At the center of it was a black hole. At that moment, there was a great suction force enveloping Su Ming's body, causing him to continuously approach it. His expression was calm. When he got close to the black hole, he lowered his head and saw a boy of about 5 or 6 years old on the tree crown beneath him. He was staring at him with an innocent smile on his face and waving at him. "Big brother, goodbye. You have to remember me." Su Ming stared at the boy, and a gentle smile appeared on his face. He stared at him and waved at him until his body disappeared into the black hole. Don't forget to vote for recommendation on Monday. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.